Chapter 969. Yun Yang's expression turned indifferent as he said nonchalantly, "I can understand your league's sincerity. Speaking of completing the deal, I can't guarantee it myself. Even if I can, it'll only be empty words. We'll have to wait until we carry our guests into the spirit's grave this time. As for what I can bring out, it's not up to me. I hope Elder Feng can understand. But I believe that the items from the spirit's grave won't disappoint the General Commerce League." "That would be best," Feng Guohai said solemnly. He took out a spatial ring and said softly, "Check it out yourself. The 10 rare metals are fine, but some heaven and earth treasures can't be exposed to the light." I understand, Yin Yang replied. He then accepted the ring. The 3 heaven and earth treasures this time are a 20,000-year-old phantom ginseng, a 17,000-year-old ghost lingji, and a 15,000-year-old amorphous lotus. Any one of them is more than 10 times more valuable than the 10,000-year-old blood ginseng you obtained last time. Yin Yang was overjoyed by Feng Guohai's words. The phantom ginseng and the ghost lingji were known to be extremely rare. But the third item, the amorphous lotus, was even rarer. The amorphous lotus did not have a fixed place to grow. It grew out of thin air and floated in midair, remaining the same from birth until maturity. This was how the amorphous lotus got its name. It was also because of this special characteristic of the indefinite lotus that it was so rare. If it wasn't for the fact that it had the special characteristic of staying in a place for a period of time where spiritual qi was abnormally abundant, no one would know about it, and no one would be able to get it. When the amorphous lotus was almost done absorbing the spiritual qi, it would return to hover in the air and continue to drift with the wind, its destination unknown until it found the next place with abundant spiritual qi. When it reached a place with abundant spiritual qi, it would be the only chance to obtain it. Due to this characteristic, the amorphous lotus was rarely more than 1,000 years old. After all, the places with abundant spiritual qi in this world were frequented by high-level cultivators. Usually, 99% of the fated ones would pluck it immediately after discovering it. The possibility of the same cultivator encountering the same stock at different points in his life was 0. So there was no room to give it up temporarily and wait for it to grow older. As a result, this amorphous lotus that was 15,000 years old was simply a legend among legends. It was a top-grade treasure that was difficult to set a price for. Yin Yang looked through the items in the spatial ring and was already beaming with joy. He said cheerfully, "The offering this time will be a success. I'm confident that everyone's hard work will not be in vain." Xiao Yushu reminded him, "Don't be too happy just yet. The number of goods we need to trade here is not small. A fair trade is the only way to get something back." "I won't let you down," Yin Yang laughed. The General Commerce League's offer was generous. Putting aside the 3 stalks of E-grade spiritual herbs, the 10 types of exotic metals alone were enough to make Yin Yang overjoyed. Whether it was the stellar steel or the extraterrestrial meteorite, although they were not considered rare or exotic, they were genuine premium goods with an extraordinary value. What surprised Yin Yang the most were the 2 pieces of unique, dark gold metals that glowed in color. "Is this the heaven mystical gold?" Yin Yang's eyes shone. Emmy, who was in the space, was already raring to go, drooling as it waved its tendrils around anxiously, its sprout hopping to urge it to move. The 3 stalks of spiritual herbs were incomparably attractive to Emmy. It wished it could skip Yin Yang and swallow the 3 spiritual herbs in one go. Emmy had been treated rather well throughout its journey with Yin Yang, but it was still in Tianxian continent after all. The quality of the heaven and earth treasures it had come into contact with was too limited. It was a pity that as an innate divine being, it was actually the first time it had seen such a high-level E-grade spiritual herb. The excitement of having dreamt of the premium item made it dance uncontrollably. The celestial cotton gold that Yin Yang had sent in a few days ago had already made Emmy overjoyed. It had been dissecting it diligently these few days, and had finally broken down some of the celestial cotton tree's material, allowing Emmy to cultivate the celestial cotton tree itself. As for the remaining long metal chain, Emmy did not waste it either. It attempted to merge it with the original exotic metals in the space, hoping that it could be refined and transformed into a better and more perfect material. The rare metals that Yin Yang had sent in earlier had been broken down by Emmy, the impurities removed. The pile that was originally like a small hill was now less than half the size of a house, but the quality was at least a few times better than before. Emmy was still grumbling to Yin Yang about how it could not further merge the finished product without high-quality exotic metals. Then Feng Guohai and the others had sent in various exotic metals. The heaven and earth treasures outside exuded a unique air of vitality that had long excited Emmy, and it could not wait any longer. Ayya! Emmy kept urging Yin Yang to work quickly. It could not wait any longer. Your league's preparation this time has surprised me. It's even higher than my highest expectations, Yin Yang said in satisfaction. Compared to before, the things you've prepared this time are much more than what you've prepared. Feng Guohai reminded him cautiously. Brother Yin, you mustn't be blindly optimistic. You must know that we've paid a hefty price to finance this transaction. We'll see if you can produce something that's worth the trade later. Otherwise, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to repay this debt alone. May I ask, Elder Feng, how much would the items you've prepared be worth if they were converted into upper-class spiritual jade pieces according to the market price? Asked Yin Yang. At least 400,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces. If they were to be auctioned, it would probably be as high as 1 million. Feng Guohai's expression was somber when he spoke of the figures. Brother Yin, the items for trade this time have been prepared according to the request you've mentioned last time. We believe that we'll get something special in this trade. That's why we've put in so much effort to come up with these. If we don't get that something special, the higher-ups will be very disappointed. 400,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces is only the market price. The 3 stalks of spiritual herbs alone would be worth more than that if they were auctioned off. Brother Yin, you must understand this. Yin Yang replied. I understand. I understand your sincerity. If I can't reciprocate your sincerity, it'll be my fault. Fairness is the most important thing in a transaction. This applies to the other party, and it applies to me as well. Gu Jiuxiao, who had always been cold, stepped forward to remind Yin Yang. Young Yin, of course, there's a guarantee of safety when working with the General Commerce League. But sometimes it's also a burden. You must understand this. The bigger the force, the more they give, the more requests they have. The items they ask for will never be ordinary goods. His voice was still cold and his words were harsh. In spite of this, Yin Yang could hear the deep concern in his words. I understand, I really do. I've understood this since the beginning of the transaction with your league. If someone gives me sincerity, I'll return the favor. Chapter 970. Just as he finished speaking, Yin Yang entered the meditation chamber. The 3 of them stood in a triangle outside the meditation chamber, watching over him with rapt attention. They could clearly feel that Yin Yang's aura had disappeared from the secret chamber. All 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief. This proved that Yin Yang had already entered the spirit's grave. This was also one of the reasons why the General Commerce League was willing to trade with Yin Yang with the utmost sincerity. Not only was Yin Yang a rare commodity, but his trading method was also exceptionally reliable. He could be traded at any time and place, and there was no need to worry about the existence of a trade. What they could do next was wait. Yin Yang's so-called disappearance of aura was merely a step into the deific consciousness space. Emmy cheered happily. It had long known that Yin Yang would come. Ayya! The vines were twisting and turning along with their bodies, unprecedentedly excited. Seeing Yin Yang enter, they wrapped their tender leaves around Yin Yang almost at once, like a child acting coquettishly. A refreshing fragrance wafted into Yin Yang's nostrils, making him feel refreshed like a spring breeze. Yin Yang pulled Emmy's large leaves away from his nose lovingly and said with a straight face, Little fellow, behave yourself. You should be satisfied now that there's so much good stuff here. Ayya! Emmy twisted its body, so happy that it had forgotten itself. Beyond your expectations? Yin Yang smiled happily as well. This was the biggest gain he had ever gained since he came to the bound of universe. The upper-class spiritual jade pieces he had obtained previously were numerous, but be it in terms of total value or quality, They were far less than this time. After all, the treasures of heaven, earth, and rare metals that he'd obtained this time were all good things that had a price but no supply. Take the ethereal amethysts, for example. You knew that one of them was worth 10,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces, but you could hardly buy it with 10,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual jade pieces. Perhaps, if it was not a coincidence, you would not be able to buy it no matter what. Just like what Feng Guohai had said, the so-called market price was not enough to describe the true value of these items. I've promised to give them some good stuff, and they've really put in a lot of effort. Do as you see fit. Yin Yang snorted. Ayya. Emmy considered it hesitantly. That's right, these things can't be given for free. I have to give something in exchange for them. But what should I give in return? Emmy pondered for a long time, but could not come up with an idea. It could not help feeling anxious. Ayya. Instead he urged Yin Yang. Yin Yang said, you have so much innate chi in your hands. You can divide it into different levels, and I'll just take some of it every time I come in. This is the best way to do it. Ayya, no problem. Once Emmy heard that it did not have to use its brain, it relaxed immediately. Its branches and leaves unfurled, its tendrils waving and twisting. Other than satisfaction, it was happy and impatient. After a while, Yin Yang walked out of the meditation room tiredly, but he could not help but feel a sense of joy. How is it? Feng Guohai leaped up. Actually, there was no need to ask. It was obvious from the expression on Yin Yang's face that he had gained a lot. In spite of this, Feng Guohai was too anxious. Despite knowing that it was forbidden, he could not help asking. My personal gain this time is still 10 pieces of ethereal amethysts. Yin Yang smiled and placed the 10 pieces of ethereal amethysts on the table. The three of them remained stoic, as they continued to look at him without saying a word. Obviously, the three of them knew that Yin Yang's gains were far more than that. 10 pieces of ethereal amethysts were already priceless. But to Yin Yang and the General Commerce League, they were no longer indispensable items, especially to Yin Yang. There's still a gust of chi left. Yin Yang said, I've sealed it on my arm and brought it out. It's hard for this thing to hold anything, so I'll need you to retrieve it on the spot. It's best if you use it directly. What chi? The three of them asked in unison. It's the chi of vitality. Yin Yang said. The old senior is very satisfied with the trade item I've brought in this time. He's given me a chi of vitality that can restore anyone who has reached the limit of their life to the prime of their youth in a matter of days. The trio's breathing quickened when they heard him. Their 6 eyes widened in unison, as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. Anyone who had reached the limit of their life. These few words seemed repetitive and cumbersome, but they were not repetitive at all. The profound meaning contained within was enough to drive anyone mad. Perhaps the young cultivators in their prime could not fully understand the value of these words. But for the older cultivators who had reached the end of their lives, and were at the final moments of their lives, only they could truly feel the preciousness of the chi of vitality. As long as a cultivator was fated to obtain a trace of the legendary chi of vitality, it was enough to extend their lifespan by 10 years. The air that Yin Yang said was sealed in his arm was obviously more than just a sliver. It was the air of vitality that could allow anyone who had reached the end of their lifespan to regain their youthful prime in a matter of days. How could it be a mere sliver? Heaven and earth treasures were valuable, and they were undoubtedly precious. However, even if it was the bound of universe's unique heaven and earth treasure, compared to a person's life, it was clear which was more important. Anyone who had reached the end of their life would only choose to prolong their life, and not choose heaven and earth treasures. Giving up on the essence of life was akin to neglecting the essentials. This logic could be applied to 99% of the cases in this world. Young Yun, do you think the chi of vitality that you've obtained can be used by a few people at the same time? Gu Jiuxiao asked in a hurried voice. To be honest, I'm not sure myself. Yin Yang said. According to the senior, he sealed my right hand with the divine sense and kept the chi in it. In other words, I'm actually only a temporary vessel for the living. As for how to use it, you guys will have to discuss it yourselves. I can't judge the exact value of this chi either. You guys will have to decide whether it can offset the items that you've provided earlier. The three of them exchanged glances, feeling the thorny issue at the same time. Once they heard about the chi of vitality, all three of them wanted it, wanting to snatch it almost immediately. After all, no one would complain about living too long. This was especially true for cultivators. In spite of it, the three of them were still far from reaching the end of their lifespans. In addition, the three of them were the ones directly responsible for this incident. If they were to use such a treasure without first reporting it, they might not have a place to stand in the General Commerce League in the future. If they were to use the chi of vitality today, they might die a violent death tomorrow. Not to mention the fact that this was a blatant act of embezzlement, it was hard to tell if the matter was true or not. From the moment Yin Yang gave a definite answer, the chi of vitality was already considered the General Commerce League's property. It no longer belonged to him, let alone be used. As for how it should be used and who it should be given to, it would have to wait for the higher-ups to decide. As he wrote this chapter, he suddenly thought of Lady May's Song of the Sunset, and repeated the song for the entire night. The more he listened, the sadder he felt. Especially when he watched Lady May's last concert, the scene of that song was even more emotional. I'm a fan of Anita Mui, although I only like 3 of her songs: Unmatched Youth, Song of the Sunset, and Woman Flower. My favorite is the Song of the Sunset. If everyone is interested, you can listen to it. Chapter 971. Since the chi of vitality belonged to the League, whoever dared to steal it would be courting death. Report immediately. Feng Guohai was decisive. Let the chief decide who will receive the chi of vitality. We'll wait here. We won't interfere. Young brother, how long can the seal on your arm last? Will it weaken with time? Asked Xiao Yushu. As he asked, he stared at Yin Yang's right arm hungrily. He looked as if he wanted to swallow this arm whole, including the skin and the flesh. Yin Yang looked troubled. I don't know either. I wasn't the one who sealed this thing, so how can I say for sure? Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a few days, maybe it's a month. I wouldn't be too surprised even if it dissipates the next moment. What right do I, a junior, have to comment on the elder's magical powers and techniques? The 3 of them were speechless. Fine. His words were as good as not saying anything, but they were also a dead end. Without further ado, Feng Guohai whipped out his communication jade and reported the news immediately. The matter had to be settled as soon as possible. Any delay would lead to more complications, and the consequences would still be severe. Yin Yang could only see the communication jade's light flickering rapidly 3 times in a row. Then it stopped. A moment later, the communication jade lit up as if it was a light, and it kept flashing. Like a lit lamp swaying in the wind, the messages from the other end surged in. Feng Guohai replied to the messages one after another, sweating profusely. It was a clear indication that there was more than one person asking questions on the other end. After a long while, the communication jade finally stopped. Feng Guohai wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and chuckled humorlessly. The chief and deputy chief are troubled by this as well. They're having an urgent discussion and need some time to come to a conclusion. Xiao Yushu and Gu Jiuxiao chuckled, looking as if they were not surprised. Of course. There's less meat and more wolves. That's how it should be. The oldest few consecrators in the Merchant Union have basically all reached the end of their lifespans. They're almost at the end of their lifespans, quietly enjoying their remaining years. The one who's most pressing is probably going to die today or tomorrow. Every day that he can live is a day that he's going to die soon. Now that there's suddenly this chi of vitality that can revive the dead, there's hope all of a sudden. It's still a big problem to decide who to give it to though. Xiao Yushu sighed. If the few high officials can recover, the League will suddenly have a few more Supreme Saints combat power. There's even hope for them to ascend to Saint Lord. Not only will the odds of winning the Celestial Luck Banner contest increase, but it'll also be an opportunity for them to stay strong. Yin Yang asked from the side. I say, shouldn't we set a price for this chi of vitality? The chi of vitality that I've obtained this time is mostly because the item in exchange is outstanding and has pleased the senior greatly. That's why he's bestowed this item. I dare not guarantee that I'll have such a spiritual item every time. Let's make this clear first, so please set a price for the league. Don't worry, the chi of vitality that I have is already your league's. What I'm thinking of is to have a rough standard of measurement in the future. Only when both parties are satisfied will we be able to work together happily. Feng Guohai chuckled dryly. Of course I understand this. Young brother's chi of vitality is a priceless treasure to us cultivators. No matter how we value it, it won't be lower than the total value of the item we've brought. However, the specific valuation will have to be decided by the people from the headquarters. We can only wait patiently now. His words were clear. Yun Yang's proposed valuation was beyond his authority, and he could not comment on it. However, it also showed that the value of the chi of vitality was indeed extraordinary. It would at least not be lower than 400,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces. Brother Yun, can I take a look at your arm? Xiao Yushu suddenly requested. Yun Yang had expected this, so he extended his arm without hesitation. Xiao Yushu and the other two grabbed it together. Yun Yang was shocked and said in a strange voice, "Be careful, don't break the seal." The three of them were embarrassed for a moment before they carefully lifted Yun Yang's arm to feel it. It's an expert's skill, truly unfathomable. Xiao Yushu clicked his tongue in admiration and said, "To seal a tangible object in your arm with the power of a divine sense that is almost invisible and intangible, this is already a top-notch technique. Not to mention that the chi of vitality did not leak out at all, nor did it fuse with your physical body. But this is truly an unimaginable technique. What's more, I can clearly feel the pure chi of vitality within with my deific consciousness, but it doesn't affect Brother Yun's ability to control his arm at all. Such a skill is simply unimaginable." Gu Jiuxiao and Feng Guohai shared the same sentiment and expressed their admiration. Putting aside the fact that his cultivation was unfathomable, just this sealing technique alone was enough to make one gasp in amazement. Although such a seal could be broken by anyone with some cultivation base, the three of them knew that it was impossible for them to create a seal like this. Not only could they not do it, but they did not even understand the principle of the seal's construction. At the very least, none of the sealing skills that they knew of could achieve such a result. What they could confirm now was that there was a gust of chi of vitality lingering between Yun Yang's wrist and below his elbow. It was palpable, and the chi of vitality that was about to burst out, but it did not leak at all. It was a rare and precious feat. It's the spirit's grave indeed. It's an unparalleled existence indeed. The trio's admiration was overflowing. That night, Feng Guohai and the others stayed. They had no choice but to do so. This was an important matter, so they had to wait for the headquarters to come and receive the chi of vitality. As for going to the headquarters with Yin Yang, haha, no matter how daring they were, they would never dare to take such a risk. At night. It's not our first time here. Why does it feel so oppressive this time? It doesn't feel like an illusion. Gu Jiuxiao felt uneasy all over. He felt like someone was spying on him at all times, as if he was naked and exposed to the other party's eyes. This kind of feeling was like a thorn in his back. Coincidentally, Feng Guohai and Xiao Yushu had the same feeling as well, which indirectly proved that Gu Jiuxiao's feeling was correct. In spite of that, what kind of expert could the newly established residents of Nine Supremes have? Is it really not an illusion? Is it because we're suspecting ghosts? Feng Guohai asked in a muffled voice. Chapter 972. The trio no longer felt anything out of the ordinary, subconsciously assuming that they had misjudged due to the immense pressure they had been under recently. However, there was no reason for the three of them to have the same misconception. At midnight, the chief instructor of the residents of Nine Supremes began to exercise his authority again. Other than Yun Yang, the other 8 came together, sealing their senses and only retaining their mystical chi as they engaged in an extreme battle of fists and kicks. Beat them to death, all of you. If you don't want to kill others, then be killed by others. Dong Qitian said faintly. By tomorrow morning, I must see at least 4 of you half dead. This concerns your ranking in the future. It doesn't matter if you choose to be merciful. Having said that, Dong Qitian swung his arms and went back to sleep. He had not been able to lie down and sleep properly for more than 4,000 years. Now that he had finally escaped, he still had to babysit for these kids. Naturally, he would not stand or sit if he could lie down. When Dong Qitian laid on the bed, the moment his back touched the soft mattress, a sense of bliss and contentment rose within him. So what if one's cultivation base is unparalleled? Dong Qitian sighed. The so-called feeling of bliss is still the most realistic feeling of an ordinary person. The higher one's cultivation base, the more one can abstain from eating and drink, but they lose the bliss of an ordinary person's appetite. Cultivating in seclusion for months and years, without sleep will deprive them of the bliss of an ordinary person's sleep. Although one can live a long life and live forever in this world, how can one enjoy the bliss of an ordinary person's children and grandchildren? Even if one is an old monster who has lived for tens of thousands of years, his entire life is filled with welcoming and sending off people, experiencing the prosperity of the universe, and even the rise and fall of the world. Will there really be the bliss of an ordinary person's emotions? After tens of thousands of years, the number of children and grandchildren would be more than 10 million. With so many children and grandchildren, which one of them would be able to stay in his heart forever? Without the concern of his family, he would be indifferent to everything like strangers. No matter how many children and grandchildren he has, how can he have a warm home? Dong Qitian lay on the bed, appreciating the softness of the mattress, but he could not fall asleep. Looking at the bright moon outside the window, his thoughts tumbled and fluctuated. For a moment, he was actually lost in his own thoughts. I remember a saying from many years ago: if you wish to ascend to the heavens, you must first be a man. But now there are cultivators everywhere. Who is being a serious person? Puff, puff, puff. Throughout the entire night, Feng Guohai and the other two could only hear the sound of flesh being struck in the training field. It was endless, coming one after another. Then the screams became louder and louder, becoming more and more mournful. The three of them were so noisy that they couldn't rest at all. They put on their clothes and went out to watch. However, the three of them shook their heads in disdain at the sight of it. On the field, the 8 people were attacking each other like mad tigers. It was one thing for their punches to land on each other, but everyone was running around like headless flies, and they hit whoever they caught. They had no target at all, and there was no order to speak of. It was simply a mess, and it was too horrible to look at. There were 2 meanings to the phrase unbearable to look at here. The first was the three's evaluation of the 8 people's strategy and tactics, which was unbearable to look at and unbearable to look at. As for the latter, it was utterly unbearable to look at. Every single one of them was dealing with 7 enemies at the same time. They were attacking others, and being attacked by 7 people at the same time. All of them were gritting their teeth. Their faces were bruised and swollen, and the ground was already drenched in blood. Everyone was constantly being knocked down, and then continuously getting up. Everyone's attacks were forceful, a testament to their extraordinary mystical qi cultivation base. However, their attacks were aimless. It was as if everyone was deaf and blind, unable to sense anything at all. They were even worse than an ordinary man, who had only learned a few days of martial arts. This kind of training method is really unique. Feng Guohai frowned. It's probably the first time I've seen something like this in my life. It's also the first time I've seen something like this in my life. Xiao Yushu and Gu Jiuxiao shook their heads as well. Such training is a waste of resources and talent. How is there any efficiency to speak of? They shook their heads as they watched. But Shi Wuqian and the others who were in the midst of the battle were slowly gaining a new feeling. In the beginning, this state of facing the enemy was indeed very uncomfortable. He couldn't see, hear, or feel. He could only attack blindly, purely relying on his martial arts instincts to attack. But later on he gradually found a way to use it. That was the 7th sense. Relying on their innate sense of danger as a cultivator, the 8 of them began to have the tendency to dodge and evade. Their attacks and movements had a certain order to them as well. They were no longer fighting blindly and purely based on luck. As a result, their injuries became more and more severe. In this state, it was as if all of them were sleepwalking. They would softly attack and greet their opponents. Only when they truly came into contact with their opponents would they exert their strength. Under this attack mode, 8 out of 10 times, they would be able to hit their opponents solidly without any tricks. Fortunately, the group's cultivation base was about the same, so there was no need to worry about anyone actually killing anyone. The first night of training was known as the Night of Purgatory. The entire night passed, and all 8 of them, without exception, were lying on the ground in a severe coma, unconscious. When dawn broke, Yin Yang came out and dragged the 8 of them into the room. He stuffed a pill into each of their mouths, and then slammed the door shut. He turned and left, paying no more attention to them. In the afternoon, the 8 of them woke up one after another, cultivating to recover and repair their physical bodies. As the 8 of them circulated their energy, they cursed loudly. Which son of a B***th beat me up like this? There's no brotherly bond at all. Don't you F***king know how to be gentler? Did you go easy on me? It's not the same. Ouch, it hurts. It doesn't matter if you use more strength in a sparring match, but I just want to ask, who F***king kicked my crotch? An exasperated voice groaned. I'm still a F***king virgin. You bastards. Ouch. I don't even know if I can still use it. You think you're the only one. Another voice had obviously just caught his breath, his voice quivering in pain. My crotch, it's about to break. Who hasn't suffered it before? Another person gloated. Who's to blame if you don't know how to move your leg when your crotch is kicked? Use your thigh to take the hit, idiot. With a loud bang, Dong Qitian sauntered in, his gait unsteady. Chapter 973. Listening to all of you talking so energetically, it looks like you didn't really use all your strength last night, and didn't reach your limits. Otherwise, how could you still have the strength to curse? Young people indeed, their recovery is amazing. Looks like I can add more. Training is only effective when you push yourself to your limits. Dong Qitian snorted. How did we not reach our limits? We gave it our all last night. We couldn't even move a little bit. Your wise chief instructor. We really gave it our all last night. Our limbs are still sore, and we feel like we've been hollowed out. Then let me ask you. Did you have any epiphany during the battle? Or should I say epiphany? This seems like. I don't think I felt anything, just pain. Other than excruciating pain. What else can you feel? Nothing. Dong Qitian nodded. Very good, very good. No epiphany? That's great. Since none of you have any epiphany, we'll continue tonight. We'll wait until you do. With that, he turned to leave. Only one sentence came from afar. I need to see a few broken bones tomorrow morning. The room was filled with wails. No. Today is bad enough. Why do we have to continue? Oh my God. Is this training? This is murder. Is this the residence of 9 Supremes or hell? Spare me. Help me. It was a pity that Dong Qitian was long gone. Even if he had heard them, he would not have paid them any heed. This chief instructor's cultivation base is actually quite good. Gu Jiuxiao smacked his lips and said, he's a saint level 4, almost the ability of an ordinary sex leader. I wonder where this kid got him from. Not bad indeed, but he looks unfamiliar. He should be a newly ascended ace cultivator. Xiao Yushu stroked his beard reservedly. A saint level 4 is indeed a worthy expert, especially in the residence of 9 Supremes now. Feng Guohai nodded, taking advantage of his seniority, his gaze pleased. Dong Qitian walked past from afar, sneering in his heart since a long time ago. You bunch of idiots only know that you're a 4th level saint on the surface. Of course, with my cultivation, you can only see what I want you to see. As for the rest, humph. It had to be said that the General Commerce Alliance's actions were rather swift. However, at midnight on the 3rd night, a peculiar sound of breaking wind suddenly arose, like the roar of a dragon, or the roar of a tiger wreaking havoc in the sky. A voice that shook the heavens spoke. The Commerce League is here. Where is Feng Guohai? Before he could finish his words, a powerful aura surged through the air. The residence of 9 Supremes was protected by a great formation, so it was not greatly affected by the pressure. However, all the forests within 100 miles of the mountain guarding formation prostrated in unison due to the pressure, like courtiers paying homage to their king. In his room, Dong Qitian only lifted his eyelids lightly, rolled his eyes, turned over, and went back to sleep. He did not care at all. Yun Yang did not delay, activating the mountain guarding formation. 5 silhouettes landed lightly like birds in the sky. The one in the lead was muscular and stocky. Who else could it be but Lang Fantian? Yun Yang, however, did not recognize any of the 4 elders behind him. They were all strangers. With a glance, Yun Yang saw that 2 of them had long white hair. They were hunched and emaciated, their faces filled with wrinkles. They were covered in age spots, and even their eyes were murky without a hint of brilliance. Their auras were even weaker, with only a slight flow of breath every few moments. They looked old and frail. Perhaps their condition was even worse than what he saw, because they had flown here with the support of the other 2. If the 2 of them had flown over on their own, the consumption of this journey would have been enough to further shorten their remaining lifespans. They would have easily run out of energy and would have breathed their last. As for the other 2 old men who were supporting them, although their conditions were slightly better than the first 2, they still appeared to be old and clumsy. They were also old people. Yun Yang flew out to welcome them personally. "Brother Yun. Ha 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 ha. Brother Yun, we meet again." Lang Fantian strode forward to greet him passionately and shook Yun Yang's hand. Brother, you've worked hard. You've worked hard." From the looks of it, they were like blood brothers who had been separated for years, suddenly reuniting in a war-torn street overjoyed. The surprise, the excitement, Yun Yang, who was directly involved, was taken aback. Cough. "Vice Chief Lang, you don't have to be so courteous." Of course. Ha 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 ha." Another hearty guffaw ensued. Lang Fantian lowered his voice and said, "I didn't expect the item you've made this time to be something that even deities can't get their hands on. It's wonderful." Yun Yang coughed. Of course. Can you let go of my hand first?" He thought to himself, this air of vitality is only the lowest grade item Emmy has. Its spiritual energy, Qi of Tao, innate purple Qi, and spiritual energy of vitality haven't been touched yet. You're already overjoyed. I'll have to adjust my plan then. How can I not make use of the rare item I have? Come, let me introduce you first. These 2 are the General Commerce League's Elders of Worship, Heaven Sword and Earth Saber. Since the General Commerce League upgraded to the middle-class Celestial Luck banner 20,000 years ago, both of you have been the League's elders. Throughout these years, you've risked your life for the League and made countless contributions. You're the League's greatest contributors. Lang Fantian pointed at the 2 old men, who were about to turn into a pile of bones and die at any moment. The 2 old men straightened themselves with effort, their murky eyes locked onto Yun Yang. "I'm Heaven Sword Song Chonggong. I'm Earth Saber Li Yisan." The 2 old men sighed together. "We don't live up to our names anymore. We can't even lift our sabers and swords now. Heaven Sword and Earth Saber's names will only make us laugh if we say them." The other 2 said respectfully, "Seniors, your reputation is unparalleled. The General Commerce League's achievement today is all thanks to your hard work. No one can compare to you." These 2 are also the League's guardians, Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi, Lang Fantian introduced. "It's an honor to meet you all." Yun Yang bowed repeatedly. "I've heard so much about you. Your names are like thunder to my ears. It's my honor to meet you all today." Lang Fantian rolled his eyes. Chapter 974. Heaven Sword and Earth Saber, Wan Qinglu, and Bai Yushi paid no heed to Yun Yang's polite words. But it was not because they believed him or not. Their attention had long been drawn to the few people who were exhausted from training in the residence of 9 Supreme's drill ground. As far as their eyes could see, the 8 people in the field were all bruised and swollen, each of them looking battered and exhausted. There were even a few who were clutching their crotches and groaning. All in all, the situation was extremely dismal and unsightly. Perhaps due to the distance and the fact that the 8 people's senses were sealed, they naturally did not sense the presence of outsiders. However, Song Chonggong and the other 3 men's gazes lingered on them for a long time. Although these people were old and dying, their experience and knowledge were still there. No matter how muddy their eyes were, it did not affect their vision. They all felt that the 8 of them were brimming with a kind of vitality that could soar to the sky. It was a vitality that had unlimited hope for the future. The 8 people were exhausted, bruised and battered, battered and exhausted, but the feeling of hope moved the four of them. It was not that they had seen through the secret of the art of ultimate heaven and sensed it. It was because the vitality of the 8 people was what they needed and hoped for the most at the moment. The 4 people from the General Commerce League, who came this time, were all cultivators of the Supreme Saint level. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi were slightly stronger, but both of them had a rough sense of the end of their lives. In about a year and a half, they would die completely. Heaven Sword and Earth Saber, on the other hand, were in an even more precarious situation. Their last bit of life was like a candle in the wind, about to die at any time. Perhaps if they closed their eyes now, it would be gone forever. In fact, these 2 old men had been in such a precarious state for several years. It was just that the General Commerce League had exhausted a lot of heaven and earth resources to barely keep them alive. But it was not a long-term solution after all. It was like trying to quench a fire with a cup of water. In fact, these 2 old men had been in such a precarious state for several years. It was just that the Merchant Union had used up a lot of heavenly treasures to barely keep them alive. But it was not a long-term solution after all. It was like trying to stop a boiling pot with a cup of water. If one had to describe these 2 old men who had made great contributions to the General Commerce League, it could only be their lives were hanging by a thread. Many people in the Merchant Union were worried that they might lose their lives on the way here. Brother Yun, the Chi of Vitality, Lang Fantian, went straight to the point, going straight to the main purpose of their trip. It was obvious that he was impatient to solve the problem. When Song Changgong and Li Yisan heard this, they turned their heads in unison. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi's eyes were filled with anticipation as well. Without further ado, Yun Yang extended his arm and said, "The air of vitality is sealed in my arm. As long as the seal is broken, it can be used. But I'm not sure how many people can use it. This is my first time bringing it out." Lang Fantian was overjoyed at the sight, leading the group into the meditation room in a hurry. Song Changgong, Li Yisan, Wan Qinglu, and Bai Yushi did not dare to be careless. One after another, they confirmed the vitality in their arms. Their aged faces were filled with excitement. In the face of death, hope had suddenly appeared. Anyone would be wild with joy, and Song Changgong and the others were no exception. The deific consciousness energy that sealed the air of vitality was particularly ingenious, at least surpassing all the techniques that Song Changgong and the others knew of. They even suspected that even the elder-level experts of upper-class celestial luck banner sects might not be able to do such an ingenious sealing technique. What was even rarer was that such an ingenious technique could be broken at any time, as if it was only to ensure the existence of the air of vitality. The sealing technique itself is a miracle. Song Changgong sighed softly. As the group sighed, they fell into an awkward atmosphere of looking at each other. The air of vitality was right before their eyes. The 4 of them had proven that it was real, but the follow-up problem was still a daunting one. Who should they give the air of vitality to? Once the seal was broken, the air of vitality would appear. It would be better if there was a lot of it, but if it was only enough for one person, who should they give it to? Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi seemed to be in great pain. In the end, they gulped and said with difficulty, "The 2 of us can hold on for at least another half a year. There's still some leeway. We can think of a way to gather the spiritual items in the following period of time and save it for the next deal. This time, Senior Song and Senior Li will go first." Having said that, both of them looked at each other and took a heavy step back, but their eyes were still glued to Yun Yang's arm. Yun Yang's evaluation of these 2 men was much higher after listening to them. Without reaching this point, it would be hard to understand just how great of a sacrifice and concession these 2 had made. Death was right before their eyes, but the hope of survival was right before their eyes, yet they were willing to give it up. This was no longer a matter of personal integrity, but a reflection of their affection. Everyone knew what the current situation was like. On the surface, as long as Yin Yang was still here, as long as the League could gather a certain amount of heaven and earth resources, Yin Yang could use them to trade. The chance of getting another portion of the air of vitality was not slim. However, the problem was not as simple as it seemed. Yin Yang had made it clear that what he could get after entering the so-called spirit's grave was not up to him. Other than luck, there was an element of fluke to be able to obtain the air of vitality this time. What about the next time? Who could say for sure what would happen next time? Perhaps the life energy would only appear once, and then never again. This might be the only chance for him to come into contact with the air of vitality. If he missed it, it would not come again. Would the people who were waiting not be completely at a loss then? Furthermore, the League had already expended a great deal of manpower, resources, and effort to gather the heaven and earth resources this time. Perhaps it could be gathered once or twice more in a short period of time. But it was impossible for them to gather all the quality resources to trade for too many times. When the next time came, perhaps time waited for no man. Trembling, Song Changgong turned around slowly and bowed deeply to Wan Qinglu and Bayushi, saying, "Thank you, brothers." Chapter 975. Song Changgong and Li Yisan bowed to Wan Qinglu and Li Yisan for the second time. Both of them knew that this was not modesty. It was modesty, and it was at the risk of their lives. Even though they were not the ones in terms of seniority, if they had the slightest evil intention, the two brothers would not have been able to make it the 10,000 li journey. They would have died along the way. As long as they obtained the chi of life and got rid of the approaching limit of their lifespans, coupled with their status, cultivation, and strength, even if the Commerce Union wanted to pursue the matter, they would not be able to do so due to the circumstances. At this moment, this scene, this deep friendship could not be expressed in words, but it could only be engraved in their hearts. If they were to forget it for even a moment, they would not be human enough. "Brother, hurry up and open the seal. Use the chi of life." Song Changgong straightened and looked at Li Yisan. "Big brother, brother. The older brother comes before the younger brother. There's no reason for me to be the first to go. Big brother, please go first." Li Yisan's attitude was very firm. Song Changgong said coldly, "Ever since we became sworn brothers, I've been in charge of everything big and small. Since when was it your turn to make decisions? I told you to use it, so you must use it. Are you going to disobey your older brother?" Li Yisan laughed. "Why should there be any distinction between brothers? Big brother, I've obeyed you all my life, but I'm tired of it. How about I defy you today?" Song Changgong said sternly, "If you don't use it immediately, I'll kill myself on the spot. Do you think I wouldn't dare?" Everyone's hearts trembled, and their expressions became solemn. Li Yisan, however, was still calm. He said calmly, "If you don't use it, I won't use it either. At most, the two of us will go to the netherworld together. Wouldn't that be fulfilling what we said when we became sworn brothers? If we were not born on the same day, month, and year, we would rather die on the same day." Song Changgong's snow-white hair and beard trembled. He panted heavily. "Are you trying to anger me to death? I told you to use it first and give me the rest. Why are you so stubborn?" Li Yisan smiled and said, "Big brother, I'm actually 3 years younger than you. I still have time." Song Changgong was exasperated. They were brothers who had known each other for a long time. Their cultivations were similar, and their ages were similar as well. Two people who had attained the cultivation of the Holy Venerables enjoyed a lifespan of 10,000 years. Was a mere 3 years of difference even considered a difference? As the two of them argued, Lang Fantian, Feng Guohai, and the others who were standing beside them were increasingly moved. These two old men had clearly reached the end of their lifespans and were on the verge of death. However, when faced with the huge temptation of choosing between life and death, they did their best to give this chance to live to the other. Lang Fantian sucked in a deep breath and said, "There's no need for this, High Reverence. Before I came, the chief privately gave me some treasured resources and told me solemnly that if the chi of vitality was real and effective, of course, we must further demonstrate the League's sincerity and ask for Brother Yin to enter again." Song Changgong and Li Yisan looked at each other. Song Changgong's wrinkled face smiled. "Brother, what are you worried about? Hurry up and use it." Li Yisan smiled in relief as well. That's right. Big brother, you really don't have to worry about me anymore." Both of them were still pushing each other to consume the chi of vitality. "If I use this chi of vitality, What if my brother doesn't have it? So what if his vitality is restored and his lifespan is extended? Both of them were thinking the same thing. Yin Yang had already been moved when he saw Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi's generosity. Now that he saw these two old men who had stuck together through life and death, their unwavering brotherly bond in the face of the greatest temptation in the world, Yin Yang was deeply touched. He interjected, "Seniors, there's no need to be so polite. It's a waste of time. In this junior's opinion, there's definitely hope for the second chi of vitality." "Why do you think so?" "There must be a reason for Brother Yin to speak so confidently." Lang Fantian, Feng Guahai, and the others asked in unison. "I've entered the spirit's grave many times, and while my knowledge of the situation within is still limited, I still have some understanding of it. For example, the first time I entered, I obtained the cultivation method and the method to enter the grave. The second time I entered, I began the bartering process. It was just that what I obtained in the beginning was only some spiritual ingredients and precious medicines that could aid in cultivation. This situation continued for a long time, until one time I entered, and the treasures I obtained were exchanged for ethereal amethysts. Then, this junior's cultivation was successful, and I reached the limit of the realm I was originally from. The senior who cultivated in the grave mentioned for the first time that he needed a higher level of heaven and earth treasure, mystical metals and metals. This was also the reason why I first transformed into the Raiders of All But God and started working with your league. Now that I think about it, the ethereal amethysts may be a rare item in this world, but they're only slightly precious in the spirit's grave. They're definitely not rare. Otherwise, the senior wouldn't have given me more than 100 ethereal amethysts that day." Feng Guahai was shocked and interrupted. "What? You have more than 100 ethereal amethysts?" Yin Yang shook his head. "Before I broke through the bottleneck of my cultivation base and ascended to the bound of universe, my cultivation base fell into a temporary stagnation. The senior who cultivated in seclusion gave me 100 ethereal amethysts at once because my cultivation base was stagnant and my search for spiritual ingredients and treasures wasn't effective. So he asked me to cultivate according to the method. My cultivation base skyrocketed in one go, surpassing the limit of my realm and ascending to the bound of universe." Lang Fantian and the others were struck with the sudden realization. Yin Yang was young, only in his 20s, but he was already a saint. It was understandable if he was born in the bound of universe and had some background, but the truth was that he was merely a guest who had ascended from the lower realm. Such progress was terrifying. Now that they heard about his cultivation experience, their doubts were cleared. Lang Fantian cut him off and said, "Brother Yin, we're interested in your cultivation experience as well, but we're really not in the mood at this juncture. Can you get to the point quickly?" Yin Yang chuckled. "We're about to get to the point. The ethereal amethysts were originally the best treasure given by the spirit's grave, but now that the chi of vitality has appeared, it's completely overshadowed. I'm afraid that there won't be a second chi of vitality. However, all of you have little contact with the spirit's grave. You don't know that the senior who cultivates in seclusion in the grave doesn't reject anyone in exchange for spiritual ingredients and mystical metals. The more the merrier. I believe that even if it's not as much as the ethereal amethysts, there should be a few more times." Yin Yang said faintly, "According to my understanding of the spirit's grave, the chi of vitality has just appeared this time. There should still be a next time. The possibility is at least 90%. Instead of standing still, it's better to try it as soon as possible. There's no need to worry about nothing." The group was deep in thought. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi's eyes flickered. Both of them had gratified expressions on their faces, and they even heaved a sigh of relief. It was one thing to be virtuous and generous, but who would be willing to die if there was a chance to live as soon as possible? Li Yisan laughed and stood up. "All right, I'll guard Big Brother outside the door and wait for the next chance." Song Changgong finally heaved a long sigh as the group tried to persuade him. He glanced at the door exasperatedly and said angrily, "If it's gone, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'd rather die than live." Lang Fantian said seriously, "Don't worry, Senior Song. Brother Yin speaks with substance and confidence. Since there's hope before us, the League will send Brother Yun in again and again, even if we have to go bankrupt, until we've obtained enough qi of vitality. He paused and said, "This is also a promise that Lord Chief has made a long time ago." Song Changgong heaved a long sigh, but Yun Yang had already sat down in front of him. Yun Yang's current cultivation base was still insufficient for him to argue with these people, but he had been with Emmy for a long time, and was extremely sensitive to the fluctuation of life force. He could easily tell that Song Changgong was indeed the weakest among these people. His breath of vitality was so weak that it was almost non-existent. Li Yisan was weak as well, but he was still slightly stronger than Song Changgong. Yun Yang was happy to verify the success of the qi of vitality, and at the same time, he admired the two old men's brotherhood. He did not want the old man to bow his head and die just like that when there was a chance of survival before him. Song Changgong placed his hand on Yun Yang's arm and covered the deific consciousness seal with his deific consciousness. With a slight movement of his deific consciousness, it was already connected to the deific consciousness seal on his arm. Yun Yang activated the power of his deific consciousness at the same time. The qi of vitality began to slowly flow out from his arm. The group watched from the side. Song Changgong's body jerked abruptly as an excited flush rose on his aged face. And Chapter 976. The group could clearly feel that the secret chamber was suddenly filled with the rhythm of life. Everyone had already spread their deific consciousness to pay close attention to Yun Yang's arm. Now, they could sense the air of vitality dripping from the seal on Yun Yang's arm. None of it was wasted. Song Changgong had absorbed it all and sent it into his meridians at once. A part of Lang Fontian's deific consciousness was wrapped around Song Changgong's body, so he could feel that Song Changgong's frail body was actually glowing with new life force. His dried meridians were softening bit by bit at a speed visible to the naked eye. The blood that had almost stopped flowing in his body began to flow once more. The most obvious change was the heart, that had been beating slowly and weakly. Now it was beating rhythmically. As the air of vitality flowed faster into Song Changgong's body, Song Changgong, who was directly involved, could acutely feel the strength, youth and vitality that he had long lost. These things that he could no longer retrieve were swiftly returning, regaining what he had lost. As the air of vitality continued to flow into his body, black and brown filth slowly seeped out of his body. It was the impurities that had blocked his meridians that were being expelled swiftly. The feeling filled him with the joy of a new lease of life. Enough! Song Changgong suddenly yelled for it to stop when the air of vitality was transferred halfway through. This old man has enough. There's still a lot left. Give it to my brother quickly. As he spoke, he struggled. This is enough for me to live. I can live for a long time. Stop it now. Yun Yang could only chuckle humorlessly and say in a low voice, "This junior admires senior's sense of brotherhood. But this air of vitality can only be used by one person, and it can't be stopped halfway. Now that I've personally come into contact with the air of vitality, I truly know what it is. The air of vitality is a life, a rhythm of life. There's a beginning and an end, a beginning and an end. Once it's stopped halfway, it's the same as cutting off a life from the middle. The air of vitality within the seal will dissipate, while the ones that have entered your body will flow out. This is the death of the air of vitality. As the person directly involved, senior, do you really not know?" Song Changgong was dumbstruck. "But what about my brother? Where there's a will, there must be a way." Yun Yang made a solemn vow. "Just for the sake of the two old sirs' deep friendship and unwavering loyalty, I'll take the initiative to request to bring out more of this air of vitality the next time I enter. Even if I have to pay a higher price, I'll bring out one more stream of air of vitality." Song Changgong heaved a slow sigh of relief and said, "Then, I'll leave everything to you, young brother." The air of vitality was slowly injected into Song Changgong's body. In less than a quarter of an hour, the transfer was completed. Song Changgong did not move since some time ago, having entered a deep meditative state. His body was shrouded in a thick layer of fog, shrouding him in a dense white fog. He could not be seen at all. After a while, Lang Fantian and the others snapped out of their daze. When they lifted their heads, Their gazes at Yun Yang were filled with an unprecedented fervor. This fervor was 10 times, perhaps 100 times more intense than before. It was especially so for Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi. Their gazes were fixed on Yun Yang, as if they wanted to swallow him whole. Yun Yang shuddered and said, "Wait patiently. I'm curious now as well. What kind of changes can this air of vitality bring to a person?" However, as he stretched out his right arm, there was now an additional pattern filled with a profound meaning, where the chi of life was originally sealed. There were still traces of the seal on his arm. It had not been completely removed. When he felt it again, it was no longer the same feeling as before. It was a sight to behold. It was unknown when Li Yisan had walked in. He looked at the thick white mist on Song Changgong's body, with a face full of gratification. He felt the vigorous life force, and his old face blossomed into a smile. He actually seemed to be in high spirits. Lang Fantian turned and said seriously, "Don't worry, elderly. I still have many precious treasures of heaven and earth here." The chief has said solemnly that if the air of vitality is real, then all of you must regain your youth no matter the cost. You won't be restrained by the limit of your lifespan. It won't be long. Li Yisan replied calmly, "Thank you for the chief's kindness, but I'm already satisfied. I dare not wish for more." He smiled and reminisced with satisfaction. Back then, Big Brother and I were very lucky. We were able to join a lower-class celestial luck banner sect when we first entered the martial world, and were chosen as true disciples. Although the sect was annexed by other sects in the battle for the celestial luck banner, both of us were taken in together and became disciples of a middle-class celestial luck banner sect. Later on, we were chosen by a superior celestial luck banner sect and became its disciple. We were taught a superior cultivation method and advanced together. Actually, Big Brother's luck has always been better than mine. It's just that he didn't have a good big brother like me. When we were at the middle-class celestial luck banner, Big Brother was chosen first. He said, "I have a brother who's more talented than me." When we were at the upper-class celestial luck banner, it was Big Brother who said, "I have a brother who's more talented than me." Just like that, we've always been together. Li Yisan smiled softly. It's true. Even when the person in charge of the sect repeatedly stated that they're only taking in one disciple, Big Brother still said the same thing and insisted on bringing me along. People always say that a little bit of kindness leads to a little bit of enmity, but I think that's just an excuse for friendship without sincerity. Otherwise, if I didn't endlessly exploit Big Brother, I'd be harming him early on and achieving my own goals. Now that the Commerce League is able to help Big Brother regain his youth, I'm already grateful. Asking for more is really extravagant. Li Yisan said. Therefore, there are many people in the Merchant Union who have made great contributions, and they are not inferior to my brother. How can we abandon Fei Manduo and exhaust the Union's resources just for the sake of the two of us? It is unreasonable, and we should not do so. Next time, even if there's still chi of vitality, you shouldn't consider me anymore. He chuckled softly and said, "Us brothers are getting a chance in our declining years. It's already too much. It's more than enough." The group fell silent when they heard him. Li Yisan's words made a lot of sense. As the saying goes, the rarer something is, the greater its value. With the miraculous effects of the chi of life, it could be said to be a priceless treasure at the moment. The previous transaction, which was worth at least 400,000 upper-grade spiritual jades, was more of a test and confirmation. Obtaining the chi of life was a pleasant surprise. Song Changgong and the other three had come. While it was a fortuitous encounter for them, it was also an experiment to determine the effects of the chi of life and the number of times it could be used. Now that the effect of the chi of vitality had been proven, and there would be chi of vitality in the future, even with Elder Song and Elder Li's contributions, taking 2 chances consecutively would attract a great deal of criticism. It was indeed unreasonable. In spite of it being unreasonable, it was not that they should not do so. This was something everyone was clear about. Lang Fantian thought about it for a long time before he spoke slowly and seriously. Perhaps Elderly thinks this is enough, but I don't think it's enough. The second deal must go through. If there's the chi of vitality, it'll be given to you, Elderly. It's your business whether you want it or not, but it's our business whether we fight for it or not. Lee Eason kept quiet for a long time before he said, Big Brother has always been more perceptive than I am. This is probably the reason why we work for the General Commerce League. He smiled and said softly, At least I didn't entrust myself to the wrong person in this life. He looked at Yin Yang and asked, Brother Yin, do you understand what I'm saying? Yin Yang thought about it carefully for a long time. He did not speak for a full quarter of an hour before he said seriously, I think I do. Lee Eason smiled with gratification in her eyes. She cracked open her toothless mouth and said, I hope you can truly understand and be enlightened. Yin Yang's face was tinged with sorrow as he said, I understand, but I probably can't do it. Lee Eason chuckled meaningfully and said, Those who admit they might not be able to do it usually manage to do it. Sometimes, it's better not to do it even if you've tried your best. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh and said, Yes. Lee Eason heaved a sigh of relief and said, It looks like you really do understand. This old man's words weren't wasted. Yin Yang did not speak. After a long time, Yin Yang asked, Seniorly, we've only just met. Why are you telling me all this? A warm smile hung on Lee Eason's freckled face as he said, A man's words are kind when he's about to die. It's just a saying, but when a man is about to die, he'll have some realizations and foresight that he doesn't usually have. Can you understand this? Yin Yang nodded. Lee Eason said, I feel that I'll be staying in the residence of 9 Supremes for some time, perhaps for the rest of my life. He smiled and said, Young brother Yin, these are the few sentences that I've summed up in my life. I feel that you're not bad. So, I hope that you can achieve great things. Of course, the most important thing is that I feel that you have hope. Lee Eason's words to Yin Yang were vague throughout, but in a certain aspect, they seemed to be very clear. Yin Yang felt that he seemed to have understood, but at the same time, he did not. To Yin Yang, who prided himself on his intelligence and foresight, it was a very peculiar feeling. Lang Fantian, who was deep in thought, asked softly, Then, seniorly, do you think that the General Commerce League, is it possible? Lee Eason thought about it and said softly, The General Commerce League. Just the word league is already too many ties. Lang Fantian's expression shifted slightly as he asked, Too many ties? This is a good thing, said Lee Eason. But it might not be a good thing either. Lang Fantian thought about it and asked, Why do you think so? Lee Eason's eyelids drooped. He did not answer for a long time. After a while he said, The higher-ups are too sentimental. Lang Fantian did not understand and asked, Sentimental? Is that a good thing? Lee Eason, however, kept his mouth shut and did not say another word. Lang Fantian was indignant about it, but he could not listen to it anymore. He pondered on his own, his brows increasingly tangled. After a long time he asked Yin Yang, Brother Yin, isn't it a good thing to be sentimental? Of course it's a good thing, replied Yin Yang stunned. Lang Fantian asked, Then why did elderly say that it's a tie? Yin Yang sucked in a long breath and said, It seems like this isn't something that someone of my level can interpret. Lang Fantian was stunned as he murmured, Sentimental and righteous are the foundation of the martial world. Yin Yang looked at him, his heart in turmoil. Sentimental and righteous were indeed the foundation of the martial world. However, sentimental and righteous were not the foundation of a hegemony. Looking at the General Commerce League's deputy chief, Yin Yang recalled the General Commerce League's chief's words, At all costs. He also wanted the two high reverends to regain their youth. The promise was too great, too much. Then, Yin Yang recalled everything that had happened since the establishment of diplomatic relations with the General Commerce League. Yin Yang understood what Lee Eason had said at once. Every sentence and word contained a deeper meaning. However, he could not explain it. The inexplicable feeling was filled with helplessness, making it even more inexplicable. As the thoughts flashed through his mind, Yin Yang suddenly realized something. The General Commerce Alliance was powerful and powerful. This was not an eyesore. It did not make sense for them to stop at the level of a middle-class celestial luck banner. Just the Supreme Saint experts alone. He had already seen 4 of them today, and all of them were on the brink of death. How many Supreme Saint experts did the General Commerce League have in total? At the very least, the most conservative estimate would not be less than 10, right? Were there saint emperors of a higher level? It was highly possible that there were. However, such a powerful ability was only a middle-class celestial luck banner? Yin Yang did not want to think about it any further. If he were to think too deeply about it, it would be too hurtful and too much torture to his heart. As for Yin Yang, he did not want to damage his confidence in this aspect. If he lost his fighting spirit, the loss would outweigh the gain. Although this was the reality, it could not be erased no matter how cruel it was. Chapter 977. For a moment no one spoke, sitting quietly in their seats as they waited. Everyone was preoccupied with their own thoughts. Lang Fantian did not speak for a long time. He sighed softly, his brows furrowed. Feng Guohai was much calmer, his eyes half-lidded, while Xiao Yushu and the others looked thoughtful. Although Li Yisan's words were a bit vague, everyone heard it in their hearts, and each of them had their own understanding. Some chose to voice it out loud while others kept it to themselves. The result caused the atmosphere to be heavy. After some time, a soft boom broke the tension. The thick white fog that everyone was fixated on dissipated abruptly. The group looked over instinctively. A collective gasp rang out. A handsome middle-aged man slowly stood up from the ground. The middle-aged man looked at Li Yisan excitedly and dashed over to hug him, crying out in ecstasy, "Brother, we have hope!" At this moment, Lang Fantian and the others were all dumbstruck and tongue-tied. It was as if everyone's mind had turned into the fragments of a cosmic explosion. Song Changgong. This handsome middle-aged man was Song Changgong? It was the Song Changgong who looked old, wrinkled, white-haired, and had not long to live. At this moment, everyone felt like they were in a trance. Am I dreaming? How did Song Changgong recover to his youthful state in such a short amount of time? This is the Qi of Vitality. Had Song Changgong absorbed the Qi of Vitality and achieved this result? Thinking about it, everyone's gaze was focused on Yin Yang's face in unison. Their gazes were filled with fervent passion. They recalled at the same time. How did this miracle happen? What was the source of this miracle? Although everyone knew that Yin Yang had obtained the Qi of Vitality from the spirit's grave and had already spoken about its effects, they were still very excited. After all, it could prolong one's life and increase one's lifespan. It was extraordinary. It was not surprising that the user's condition would improve as a result. However, the outcome now was, Yin Yang had never mentioned that the Qi of Vitality could rejuvenate one's youth. Song Changgong hugged Li Yisan, hot tears streaming down his face. Li Yisan was also weeping. The two brothers had been companions for their entire lives. They had faced the wind and rain, faced life and death, faced the world of martial artists, and most importantly faced each other. These two old men had been companions for longer than anyone else. Naturally, he had personally witnessed the struggle and hesitation of the other party. He had also personally witnessed the other party grow old along with him. This kind of feeling was indescribable. And now, Li Yisan had personally witnessed the miracle that had happened to her big brother. The joy she felt at this moment was simply incomparable. "Congratulations, big brother," Li Yisan said sincerely. He silently said in his heart, "After seeing this scene, even if I have no hope, or even if I die immediately, I can go on my way without any regrets." Because his brother had recovered to his peak state through this karma, he naturally had the ability to take care of himself. Even if he was not by his side, it was fine. Song Changgong's eyes were fixed on Li Yisan's head of white hair and the crisscrossing wrinkles. He said pitifully, "Brother, you'll be like big brother. I promise. No matter what price I have to pay, I'll restore your youth." He turned around and calmed his emotions. Facing Yin Yang, he bowed deeply in gratitude. "Brother Yin, thank you for the Qi of Vitality." Yin Yang returned the gesture quickly. "Elder Song is too courteous. It's a fair trade. I dare not accept Elder Song's thanks." Although Yin Yang was touched by the brotherly bond between these two elders, and had even thought of lending a helping hand to Li Yisan, the occasion was not appropriate. If he were to accept Song Changgong's thanks, both parties' stances would inevitably change, and would no longer be the same as they had been in the beginning. Therefore, Yun Yang was straightforward, attributing everything that had happened to them to a trade. Favors could exist in a trade, but they had to be viewed from a macro perspective. They could not be overly involved in personal feelings, or else it would be biased and disadvantageous. I'm not being courteous. Song Changgong straightened himself and said seriously, this old man knows your standpoint and attitude. I must thank the Commerce League as well, but to you, this gratitude is unavoidable. This is especially so since this old man has a presumptuous request. Yun Yang looked at Song Changgong and then at Li Yisan, understanding dawning on him. Brother Yun, I believe that you know what this old man is asking of. Just name your terms. No matter what they are, no matter the price, this old man will not hesitate to ask for your help. Song Changgong enunciated each word seriously. My brother needs the chi of vitality as well. He straightened himself and said softly, no matter the price, I can pay it. Yun Yang frowned and said, Yun Yang has seen and appreciated the friendship between Elder Song and Elder Li. But when it comes to helping with the chi of vitality, I can only promise to do my best to help both of you. I can't guarantee anything. After all, this is not something that I can decide. Song Changgong said, of course. This old man thanks Brother Yun for being willing to lend a helping hand. Yun Yang thought about it for a moment and said faintly, If I can't get it successfully, or if I'm delayed. Li Yisan's expression darkened. Yun Yang's words seemed to be stating the pros and cons, but it was obvious that he was testing their brotherly bond. Even if he did not have malicious intentions, he must have an ulterior motive, an impure one. Big brother. Before Song Changgong could speak, Li Yisan had already spoken up. Big brother, life and death are decreed by fate. It can't be forced. It's my fortune to get it, but it's my fate to lose it. Song Changgong shook his head. His eyes filled with warmth as he looked at his brother. After a while, he smiled faintly and turned to face Yun Yang again. Suddenly he raised a hand and said, I, Song Changgong, swear to the heavens that if my brother can't regain his youth, then both of us brothers will live and die together. Live and die together, come and go together. With a loud boom, thunder boomed in the air. The vow was made. It was a vow made to heaven's way. Li Yisan had never expected Song Changgong to make such a decision. He could not help trembling as he froze, tears streaming down his face. Big brother you. His voice was choked, unable to speak. Since the vow had been made, it was too late to dissuade him. It was meaningless. Song Changgong smiled faintly. You and I are brothers. This is how it is. The promise of brotherhood in the past is still ringing in my ears. The chi of vitality that I've obtained today was given to me by you. If you can't get it, why should I stay in the mortal world alone? We've roamed the martial world together for tens of thousands of years. We've been together for so many years. If you really leave first, do you really have the heart to let me suffer in loneliness and silence for a long time with guilt? Chapter 978. Lang Fantian, and the others were stunned as well. The shock they were feeling was indescribable. They stared at the two brothers dumbfoundedly, their gazes suddenly brimming with admiration. They had always known that these two old men had supported each other throughout their lives, that their brotherly bond was deep, that they were extremely close, and that they would go through life and death together. However, they did not expect their brotherly bond to be so earth-shattering that it would last through life and death. One had given up when faced with the hope of regaining his youth. The other had regained his youth, but was willing to give it up for his brother. This was such a sincere brotherly love. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi exchanged a glance, and saw the shame in each other's eyes. The hardest person to deceive was none other than himself. He asked himself honestly, if such an opportunity were to fall in front of him, would he be like these two people, and give it up on a silver platter? Both of them shook their heads silently and bitterly. Perhaps it was because they were not close enough, perhaps it was a coincidence, but the most important thing was, I've never had such a brotherly bond. Vice Chief Lang. Song Changgong turned to Lang Fantian and said, I'm afraid we brothers will have to stay in the residence of 9 Supremes for some time. Lang Fantian nodded readily. Don't worry, Elder Song. Leave it all to me. He thumped his chest loudly. Lang Fantian was a brute, but he was not an idiot since he was the vice chief of the General Commerce League. He could see clearly now that Song Changgong had indeed fully recovered, and he had regained his peak third-level Supreme Saint's ability when he was at his peak. It was real. The ability was secondary. What mattered most was that he had gained at least a few thousand years of cultivation time from now on. With his cultivation and experience, no one could tell what level he could reach in the future. However, there was no doubt that he would be stronger than he was now. If he could get Song Changgong to owe him a huge favor now, how much of an investment would that be? Even if he could not owe him a favor, he could at least forge a friendship. It would be a worthwhile investment. Moreover, if the favor was achieved, it would not be just Song Changgong alone, but Li Yisin, who had regained his youth, would also be included. He would be profiting immensely. It was equivalent to having 2 more backers at the highest level of the General Commerce Alliance. On the other hand, Yin Yang's refusal and procrastination would not earn him a favor. Not only would he offend both of them, the most direct outcome would be the General Commerce League, losing the 2 elders, Song Changgong and Li Yisin. Once Li Yisin passed away, Song Changgong would be buried with him, going to the netherworld together. This outcome would mean that the General Commerce League's deal with Yin Yang would all be for naught. It would be a complete loss, a futile effort. Calculating in this way, he naturally had to pat his chest and guarantee that he would do his best to make this happen. Song Changgong's handsome face was filled with kindness as he said, "Thank you, Deputy Chief Lang." Before his words echoed in the air, he took off his spatial ring and passed it to Lang Fantian along with Li Yisin's spatial ring, saying slowly, "These are our lifetime savings. If it's not enough to exchange for Brother Yun's chance to enter the spirit's grave again, I hope that Vice Alliance Master Lang can help gather some." Then he smiled and said apologetically, "Everyone, we brothers have something private to talk about. Brother Yun, please prepare a quiet room for us." "Thank you." Yun Yang made the arrangements without a second thought. "Please go ahead, both of you." Song Changgong supported Li Yisin and left slowly. Everyone stared at the duo's retreating silhouettes, their gazes filled with shock and gratitude. Without a doubt, Song Changgong had gone to comb through Li Yisin's meridians. Li Yisin's current condition could no longer be nourished by mere external items. But with Song Changgong's recovered ability of a third-grade Supreme Saint, combing through his brother's body with all his might, there would be a certain effect. Moreover, both of them understood each other so well, knowing each other's ability level and physical flaws. Under such conditions, as long as the Chi of Vitality could still be obtained, Li Yisin could definitely wait with Song Changgong's support. Everyone believed that Song Changgong would buy enough time for Li Yisin, even if he had to risk his life. When the crowd turned to look at Yin Yang again after Song Changgong and Li Yisin left, their expressions were unprecedentedly passionate. "Brother Yun." Lang Fantian's face was flushed with excitement. "This Chi of Vitality is amazing. It's truly amazing." Feng Guohai and the others' eyes were shining as well, their faces flushed and their words incoherent as if they were drunk. Even the 2 Supreme Saint experts, Bai Yuxi and Wan Qinglu, were overwhelmed with excitement. As the saying went, seeing was believing. No matter what Yin Yang had said, or how they had observed with their deific consciousness, it was nothing compared to the effect of having someone personally experience the Chi of Vitality. Now that it was being used on a dying man like Song Changgong, it could be said that the effect of the Chi of Vitality was being displayed to the fullest. It was truly astounding, breathtaking. As for the Chi of Vitality that Yin Yang had provided, it was not an exaggeration to say that it could receive any kind of praise after such an effect. Cough. Vice Chief Lang. Feng Guohai coughed and shot Lang Fantian a look. "Let us discuss the pricing of the Chi of Vitality first. I wonder what the headquarters thinks of the Chi of Vitality. Do you have a price in mind?" He tilted his head and glanced at Yun Yang, saying with a smile, "I believe that Brother Yun values this the most." Lang Fantian was hit with a sudden realization. Yes, of course. It was as if he had just woken up from a dream. The situation was obvious. Yun Yang's Chi of Vitality had been brought out, and its effects had been proven. It was already a high-quality product. As long as it was a product, it should have a price. It was especially so now that they were discussing the next time they would bring out the Chi of Vitality. If the price they offered did not match the other party's price, the other party would not bring it out anymore. What should they do? Therefore, the price had to be set carefully, and it had to be set high instead of low. Lang Fantian only thought about it before he made up his mind. He said honestly, "Before I came, the League headquarters did consider the Chi of Vitality. Now, however, the initial consideration is no longer the main point. I'll just speak the chief's opinion." Just like what Feng Guohai had said, Yun Yang was indeed concerned about the pricing of the Chi of Vitality. Lang Fantian said, "The chief said that, as long as the Chi of Vitality is real and effective, we're willing to offer a price of 1,000,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces, according to the highest treatment." Once Lang Fantian spoke, Feng Guohai subconsciously sucked in a cold breath. 1,000,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces. 10,000 lower-class spiritual jade pieces equaled 1 upper-class spiritual jade piece. 1,000,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces equaled 10 billion lower-class spiritual jade pieces. A whole 10 billion lower-class spiritual jade pieces. The lower-class spiritual jade pieces were the most common currency in the bound of universe. Chapter 979. The resources given by the League last time will be priced according to the normal market price. Lang Fantian finished his discussion with Feng Guohai and said, "It's about 600,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual jade. According to the original agreement, we'll offer superior heaven and earth resources and mystical metals in exchange for Brother Yun's gains from the spirit's grave this time. However, the Chi of Vitality is too precious. Brother Yun will suffer a great loss if the deal is really carried out. Therefore, if Brother Yun has no objections to the pricing, the League will owe Brother Yun 400,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual jade, or items worth 400,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual jade. Brother Yun, what do you think of the deal? Do you have any objections? Speak your mind." Lang Fantian asked cautiously. The current situation was completely different from before. The Chi of Vitality that Yin Yang offered was miraculous, and the quantity was scarce. Naturally, he was the stronger party, and Lang Fantian's attitude was much more humble. "I basically have no objections." Yin Yang agreed after a moment of consideration. The other party had offered the highest price for the Chi of Vitality, while the General Commerce Alliance had offered the middle price for the other goods. In this case, the difference in the middle was already a huge sum. No matter how one looked at it, the General Commerce League was sincere in this deal. To be fair, the deal had already been agreed upon earlier. The bargaining chip was a one-time supply of resources in exchange for Yin Yang's earnings from the spirit's grave. Now that the spirit's grave had given out items that had greatly exceeded their expectations, it was also because of the Commerce League's good foresight. It was understandable that they did not compensate Yin Yang for the difference. Now that they had taken the initiative to offer to compensate the difference, it was a sign of more goodwill and sincerity. Yin Yang was even more impressed. This General Commerce League's chief is truly a character. Just this boldness alone is enough to make people admire him. No wonder he was able to establish such a huge foundation for the General Commerce Alliance. "Then, Brother Yin, do you want spiritual jade or resources for the difference in price?" asked Lang Fantian. Yin Yang thought about it and said, 100,000 pieces of upper-class spiritual jade, and 300,000 pieces of heaven and earth resources. What do you think, Vice Chief Lang? Alright, it's a deal then. Lang Fantian answered without hesitation. He then opened his spatial ring and rummaged through it, storing the items he had picked up in another spatial ring, and passed it to Yun Yang. "Brother Yun, there are 100,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces, and 300,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces worth of heaven and earth resources in here." Shopkeeper Feng explained it to Brother Yin. Brother Yin hasn't been in the Xianhuang world for long, so he might not know everything. Feng Guohai nodded. "Very well, it's a given." Both of them were unperturbed, scanning the items roughly on the spot. Feng Guohai studied the treasures given by Lang Fantian with ease, listing out their origins one by one. In the end, He concluded that there were 300,000 of them, a little more than that, amounting to about 320 and 30,000. Yun Yang called Little Fatty over as well. Little Fatty roughly estimated the total value of these heaven and earth resources to be around 340,000, perhaps a little more. Strictly speaking, the difference between the two men's valuation was obvious. There was at least a difference of 10,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces. It was a huge sum of wealth, but Feng Guohai had obviously underestimated the total price. It further displayed the General Commerce League's sincerity. It was as good as it could get. They were afraid that any unpleasantness would disrupt the subsequent collaboration. With this kind of attitude, and resources, everyone was naturally happy with the situation. Based on the current situation, the price for entering this time had already been paid. It was the 3 superior spiritual herbs and more than 10 pieces of mystical metals. The additional 400,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces now was no different from Yin Yang's personal reward. Perhaps, it was the commission that the General Commerce League had given to Yun Yang. Yes, it was the profit from this transaction. In spite of it, a commission of 4 billion lower-class spiritual jade pieces had already exceeded the level of extravagance. It was simply outrageous. Yun Yang had the intention to return the favor, so he stopped while he was ahead. This batch of heaven and earth resources will be calculated at 300,000. It's equivalent to receiving 30,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces in advance for the next transaction. Lang Fantian and the others agreed to it after a few rounds of pleasantries. It was a happy ending. Yin Yang knew it very well. The reason they were so courteous was entirely because of the spirit's grave. Perhaps, it was because of the deific consciousness suppression and the deific consciousness seal. They were too afraid of the deific consciousness inside. This was the reality that should be expected. If he did not have such a trick, he would have been captured long ago and would not be able to escape for the rest of his life. The talent of the ethereal physique was rare, perhaps unique, but it was not irreplaceable. At least, it was far from being comparable to the benefits of the spirit's grave. Being able to activate the spirit's grave was his biggest trump card to save his life. In spite of it, it was one thing for the other party to be wary, but it was another for them to be able to trade fairly and respectfully. Although he had the upper hand, he could not go overboard. Otherwise, it would not be good if the pleasant collaboration turned sour. If so, Brother Yin, when do you plan to enter again? Lang Fantian's usually composed face was tinged with impatience. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi's eyes were burning as well. The significance of entering again this time was different from the previous time. The implications were too great. Li Yisan was not the only one who desperately needed the qi of vitality. Both of them needed it as well. We don't have many years left, Feng Guohai asked on their behalf. Can we go in again now? Yin Yang chuckled humorlessly. Elder Feng, how could you even ask such a question? Feng Guohai chuckled awkwardly as well. He understood everything, but the others did not. Theoretically speaking, it's possible to go in now, Yun Yang said helplessly but honestly. After all, the senior in the spirit's grave desperately needs these things as well. From this point alone, the more frequently we enter, the more welcome he'll be. However, if we go in now and bring enough heavenly materials and earthly treasures with us, and the time between the two visits is so short, and the resources we give out are so excellent that they are far better than before, it's inevitable that the other party will feel that it's too easy for us to collect these things, and it'll inevitably reduce the benefits of the transaction. Yin Yang said, it's already a great disadvantage to lower the profit. What's more, if the senior inside sets a fixed deadline for the transaction, then we'll be too passive. Even if the deadline isn't set, we'll only have to raise the price of the transaction, and it'll become more difficult for us. I believe that there's a limit to the resources your league can collect. Based on this premise, I hope that the price of the items to be traded in the future won't increase due to impatience. Yun Yang said sincerely. Therefore, the premise of our request should be a long-term collaboration. If it becomes difficult or even a predicament, we'll be neglecting the essentials, and the future will be uncertain. Also, While the chi of vitality is precious and effective, there aren't many seniors like Elder Song, Elderly, and Wanbai who are limited by their lifespans in the league. I believe the Commerce League won't focus all of its attention on the chi of vitality, will it? I think there might be something better than the chi of vitality in the spirit's grave. Blindly acquiring the chi of vitality will consume too many resources. If we don't have the resources to exchange for something better. Chapter 980. Lang Fantian, Feng Guahai, and the others were members of the General Commerce League. To be able to hold such high positions, they were naturally well-versed in business. How could they not know that Yun Yang's words were extremely reasonable? He was not only considering for himself, but also considering the pros and cons of both parties. He was truly sincere. Brother Yun does make sense. Lang Fantian said candidly, "We've been overly concerned about the magical effects of the chi of vitality. We've been a little too hasty." He thought about it and could not help asking, "Then, how often do you think we should enter?" "The next time we enter, it's best if we prepare 20% more items than this time." Yin Yang stated his conditions and said after some thought, "As for the time to enter, we'll have to wait for half a month, even if it's the fastest. And this time could be said to be very tight. We can't shorten it any further." He emphasized, "The next time we enter, it'll be best if we can extend the time for the next one." "Half a month? Is it too long?" Lang Fantian mused. "This is already the shortest time. It's longer than the interval between each time I enter the spirit's grave." Yin Yang said decisively, "There's one more thing I have to make clear. Perhaps after a few more times, the items that must be traded will require the power of providence other than heaven and earth treasures, upper-class spiritual jade, and mystical metals." He chuckled humorlessly and spread his arms. "To be honest, my original plan was to slow down the frequency of my entry into the spirit's grave as much as possible, while speeding up the construction of the sect, hoping to obtain a certain amount of providence in the buffer period. My residence of 9 Supremes has only just been built. How far away from obtaining the providence is it? If I can't provide the necessary items by then, I'm afraid I'll be disqualified from the trade. It'll be too late for regrets then. Due to this crucial point, we have to leave some buffer time for ourselves, so that the sect can have room to develop. At the very least, we have to be qualified to compete for the providence. Only then can we talk about a longer term." Lang Fantian mused and said slowly, "Brother Yin makes sense." On the other side, the 5 people from the General Commerce League nodded in agreement as well. According to the usual pattern, Yun Yang should follow up his victory and further expand his gains. When doing business, who didn't know the principle of striking while the iron was hot? In spite of this, Yin Yang did the exact opposite. Not only was he not in a hurry, he was even advising others not to be in a hurry as well. With such a stance, the crowd couldn't help but be more convinced about the exchange of the spirit's grave. Instead, he began to admire Yin Yang. If he had been in Yin Yang's position, he might not have been able to do better and be more clear-headed under the onslaught of huge benefits. This was the clear-headedness that a person who wanted to do great things should have. If he blindly sought instant benefits and drained the pond, he might not be able to exchange for anything one day. If he really couldn't even enter the spirit's grave, he might not even be able to enter it. That would truly be a disaster. Yin Yang's personal safety was irrelevant, but the General Commerce League's hope of soaring would become a castle in the air unsustainable. Brother Yin has great foresight and is prepared for danger in times of peace. "We are impressed," the crowd said in unison. "Half a month then," Lang Fantian said. "With the resources I've brought this time, it'll be enough for 3 to 4 exchanges based on the amount of this exchange," he sighed. Just like what Brother Yun said, there's a limit to the resources that the General Commerce League can collect. I've brought half of the General Commerce League's tens of thousands of years' worth of reserves this time. But this accumulation can't even support a few exchanges. If we're really eager for instant benefits, it's indeed unwise and foolish. Don't worry, Vice Chief Lang. We brothers will do our best. As long as we're willing to seek for these resources, There's still a lot that can be done in this vast world. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi were suddenly filled with confidence, their eyes gleaming brightly. Both of them had made up their minds. If it really didn't work out, they would steal or rob. No matter what, they had to get more of these resources. Heaven and earth treasures. Were they not abundant in the entire continent? Even if it was for the sake of their reputation, they could still conceal their faces. If so, it's decided. Half a month later, we'll go in for another exchange, Yun Yang said decisively. Very well. Lang Fantian was a straightforward man. He was never one to drag his feet, so he said decisively, if that's the case, the 5 of us will leave first and return to the headquarters. For the sake of our future plans, we must explain this to the chief and make a decision. Yun Yang nodded in understanding. Wan Qinglu and Bai Yushi were actually rather reluctant about this, but there was nothing they could do. They had to return. Only when they returned and reported the matter would they be able to verify it completely. Once the higher-ups were of one mind, the matter would be easier to handle. Moreover, it was Lang Fantian, Xiao Yushu, Gu Jiuxiao, and Feng Guohai who had reported the matter from beginning to end. The 4 of them were of course in the same boat. How could they let the 4 of them verify it again? Both of them were the true eyewitnesses. Who would go back if they did not? As for Song Changgong, he had to stay here to take care of Li Yisan. No one dared to disturb him. Asking Song Changgong to return was, of course, the most persuasive thing to do. But who would be willing to do so? Li Yisan's life was at its end. He could die at any time. If Li Yisan were to die before Song Changgong returned, who could withstand Song Changgong's wrath? This was not a risk they could take. As for asking Song Changgong to return with Li Yisan, the group thought about it and decided that it was best not to even mention the possibility. If they did, they might be blasted into minced meat by Song Changgong on the spot. Farewell. Lang Fantian cupped his fists and reminded, Brother Yin, you must work hard too. There's less than half a year left before the battle for the lower-class Celestial Luck Banner. I wish you the right to challenge for the Celestial Luck Banner's ownership. Lang Fantian was not at all worried about Yin Yang's establishment of a sect, and did not ask about it at all. What does the speed of a newly established sect have to do with me? As for seizing the Celestial Luck Banner, TSK, are you dreaming? Is the Celestial Luck Banner so easy to obtain? Now, however, Lang Fantian was more concerned about the matter than anyone else. He was even more concerned than Yun Yang, the residents of 9 Supremes. He even wanted to fight for the residents of 9 Supremes himself. The outcome of obtaining the Celestial Luck Banner was too crucial. There must be no mishap. Yin Yang nodded. Don't worry, he thought. I'm more anxious than you are. And Chapter 981. It was one thing for Yin Yang to be confident, but how could the General Commerce League be at ease? The situation of the residents of 9 Supremes was almost clear at a glance. There were only 2 or 3 of them, and their top combat force could barely fight the last few higher-ups of the lower-class Celestial Luck Banners. However, as long as the other side brought out their top combat force, or even their combined combat force to fight, the residents of 9 Supremes would be no match for them. The disciples you've recruited are obviously of poor aptitude, and are not worthy to be brought to the table at all. There were many battles to be fought for the Celestial Luck Banners, including a one-on-one battle between their top combat force. Most of the battles were fought by the strongest experts of each sect. Then, there was the battle between the top combat force between the 2 sections. Basically, there were 3 matches, but a few of them were decided according to the situation at the time. Then there were the battles between the core disciples. There were at least 5 matches on this floor, and if no one fought, it would be considered as a defeat. Besides, there was also the final battle of formations, which was a comprehensive battle strategy that gathered the elite combat force of each sect. It went without saying that the sect would turn out in full force. Therefore, although there were 4 rounds of battles in name, the actual number of matches was more than 10. The core disciple battles were usually decided by winning 3 out of 5 matches. As the challenger, Only by winning this match would they have the qualifications to enter the next stage of the battle between the top disciples. The battle of the top combat force was usually best of 3 out of 3, and the challenger would only be qualified to enter the next battle of the top combat force if it won this match. If it did not win, it would immediately lose the qualification to challenge the next battle. Then there was the Battle of Formations. There were no strict requirements for this battle, and both the winner and the loser could enter the final battle of the top. However, the Battle of Formations had always been the one with the most casualties in the 4 rounds of battles. As the saying went, injuring 1,000 enemies while injuring 800 was especially applicable here. Basically, after this round, both the challenger and the banner guardian sect would suffer heavy losses and be greatly weakened. In the final battle of the top, the opponents were usually the strongest combat force of the sect, putting an end to the battle of the celestial luck banners. As long as one could obtain 3 victories in the flag battle, one would be able to challenge the celestial luck banner of the target, but only a newly ascended sect that won all 4 battles would have the opportunity to challenge the next sect. If one could only win 3 out of 4 battles, he would only be qualified to advance to the last place in the lower class celestial luck banner. If one wanted to advance further, he would have to wait for 3 years before he could fight again. In other words, if he could keep winning all 4 battles, he would be able to keep advancing, as long as the interval between each victory was less than 3 months. So, theoretically, it was possible to obtain many celestial luck banners in a short period of time. However, the problem now was that the residence of 9 Supremes was too weak. At least, in the eyes of Lang Fantian and the others, Yun Yang's residence of 9 Supremes had no hope of winning any of the battles. Winning a single battle was already an extravagant hope, let alone obtaining the celestial luck banner, winning all 4 battles, and continuously challenging the sects with celestial luck banners that ranked higher than them. Although the cultivation base of Shi Wuchen and his companions was extraordinary, they were at most core disciples in the top few sects with lower-class celestial luck banners. There were only a few days left before the battle of the celestial luck banners began. Could they really make another breakthrough in such a short time? Even if 1 or 2 of them were lucky enough to achieve a breakthrough, it was impossible for all of them to achieve a breakthrough and gain the qualification to pull down Kangwu Union, the last sect with the lower-class celestial luck banner. Lang Fantian left worriedly. "I'll be back in 7 days at most." Lang Fantian and the others sprung up and soared into the sky, speeding toward the southern sky. Song Changgong and Li Yisan stayed in the residence of 9 Supremes. Song Changgong was well-behaved, staying in the small yard that Yin Yang had given him, not leaving the house at all. Of course, the main reason for his well-behaved behavior was because of his brother. From morning to night, he had been using his refined mystical qi to nurse his sworn brother's meridians. The work was done almost day and night without any signs of fatigue. Li Yisan tried to dissuade him from doing so, but Song Changgong ignored him completely, taking care of his own affairs. "I hope that it belongs to 2 people, not just 1. Song Changgong was stubborn. "If only one of us can have it, why don't we both just give it up and go to the netherworld together? We brothers can't do anything earth-shattering, but this brotherhood can't be blasphemed, tainted, or killed, even if it's for each other." On the second morning after Lang Fantian and the others left, the last 2 members of the Demiurge Flawed 10, Wu Minghuan, the purple-robed Golden Needles, and Luo Dajiang, the star-souled Saber Man, arrived at the residence of 9 Supremes. The Demiurge Flawed 10, the 10 legendary ultimate whetstones, had not been gathered so neatly for a long time. Now, they had finally gathered in the residence of 9 Supremes after such a long time. It was not just Yin Yang. Even the 10 of them felt a sense of awe that they had not felt for a long time. The reason why Wu Menghuan and Luo Dajiang had arrived so late was not only because they had traveled the furthest, but also because they had brought their families along. Before they came, they did not seem to have considered whether the residents of 9 Supremes would accept them. The 2 groups of carriages met in front of the residence of 9 Supremes Mountain Gate. Wu Minghuan leaped down from the carriage, and stared at the residence of Nine Supreme's mountain gate with a distant gaze, not moving for a long time. On the other side, Luo Dajiang did the same. Both of them saw each other's arrival, but it was as if they did not see each other. After a while, Luo Dajiang sighed softly. "It looks like you've made up your mind." "Yes, you've made up your mind too," Wu Menghuan replied quietly. Both of them were still not looking at each other, but they were smiling as they spoke. "Since Shi Wuchen and the rest are here, I believe the residence of Nine Supremes, the 10 Supremes' home, won't disappoint us," Wu Menghuan continued. "Even if we're disappointed, it'll only be the last time." Luo Dajiang's expression was as calm as still water, and so was his tone. "Heh, we've been lacking the opportunity to join a sect for so many years, but the result of joining it is only disappointment and humiliation again and again," Wu Menghuan said. "We've endured too much of such humiliation before, so we don't mind it anymore. However, if the recommendation from us, the Demiurge Flawed 10, ends up in the same situation, I'm afraid I won't be able to take it." Luo Dajiang was silent for a moment before he murmured, "I hope we can really have a shelter this time. Is such a wish really that extravagant?" "It is truly extravagant." Both of them still did not look at each other, but they strode forward at the same time. "Please announce that Purple-Robed Golden Needle Wu Menghuan and Starsoul Saber Man Luo Dajiang have come to join the mountain gate." Chapter 982. As a thick white mist rapidly emerged, an equally thick aura of spiritual energy suddenly appeared. Yin Yang appeared with a smile. "Brothers, you're finally here. Yin Yang and the others have been waiting anxiously. Please, come in quickly." At this moment, in this instant, the two of them only felt that their hearts, which were originally hanging in mid-air, suddenly calmed down in front of this smiling face, and their hearts immediately warmed up. Wu Menghuan cupped his fists and said, "How dare I trouble Head Supreme Yin to welcome us personally? Where are Shi Wuchen and the rest?" Yin Yang's smile grew more affectionate. "They're all training. I guess they're all unconscious now. It's all right, come in first. He's been drilled to the point where he's unconscious, right?" These words, why did they sound so horrifying? Was the residence of Nine Supremes not a newly established sect? Yin Yang, Chief Supreme Yin, the founder of the residence of Nine Supremes, had a mediocre cultivation base. What kind of expert could there be in the sect to train Shi Wuchen and the others? It was baffling. At the same time, it was terrifying. Wu Menghuan and Luo Dajiang entered the residence of Nine Supremes' mountain gate in bewilderment. Behind them, their family members looked around curiously at the various buildings within the residence of Nine Supremes' mountain gate. Both of them were determined to go all out on this trip, bringing along all their parents and family members, including Wu Menghuan's parents and 2 younger sisters. Other than his parents, Luo Dajiang also brought along a stubborn girl dressed in red. "Brother Luo, may I ask who this lady is?" Yin Yang was rather puzzled. "I'm Jiang Luo Luo." The girl in red pouted and said, "Jiang Luo Luo," the reverse of Luo Dajiang's name with the removed. Yin Yang coughed. "Oh, sorry for the disrespect." Was this an explanation of her background or her name? It seemed very puzzling and thought-provoking. "Luo Dajiang is my fiancé. We were betrothed when our families were young. But now that my parents are gone, Luo Dajiang doesn't want to acknowledge it and wants to abandon me." Jiang Luoluo's tears fell. "I can't find anyone to stand up for me. And I don't know how to punish this heartless person. I can only follow him. I want to see how this heartless person ends up." Humph. Luo Dajiang almost vomited blood. "Luo, can you be a little more reasonable? How am I abandoning you? Haven't you suffered enough humiliation in the days you've been with me? You're a disciple of a mid-level celestial luck banner sect. You have a bright future ahead of you. So why bother to follow a person with a dim future like me? Seeing me being used as a whetstone by those people every day, humiliated and toyed with after using me. Could it be that when a woman looks for a husband, she has to look for someone like me? How can there be a future?" Jiang Luoluo's eyes were filled with stubbornness as she said, "There's no use saying all these useless things. My parents promised me to you back then. If they were still alive, it's fine if you don't want me. I can still ask them to retract their promise. But they're all gone. Where can I find them to take back their orders? Can't a man like you be more responsible? I'm not asking you to be indomitable. But can you keep your word for once? So what if you were humiliated? So what if he had used it and played with it? This is God's test for you. I'm sure you'll achieve great things in the future. You Luo Dajiang obviously feel that you'll be great in the future, so you want to dump me in advance. You despise me. You abandoned your wife, you're shameless. Sob. Luo Dajiang's face turned red, helpless. I'm not that kind of person. Then why don't you marry me? How can I marry you like this? Stop fooling around. Why am I fooling around? You're the one who wants to be a heartless person. You're making a false accusation. I'm not. How am I a heartless person? I didn't do anything. You are. You are. You are. You are. The girl's eyes glistened with tears as she said repeatedly, You are. Leave now. Luo Dajiang looked conflicted. I'm no longer alone. When your sect comes looking for me again, it won't just involve me this time. But so many of my brothers are here. Do you want me to implicate my brothers? The girl glared at him. As long as you marry me and have a status, I'll leave. Is that all right? Yin Yang looked at the valiant girl in front of him and could not stop praising her. This girl was truly a model. He had already thought that Ji Lingxi was very valiant, a tomboy, and Shengguan Lingxiu was full of valiance and heroism. However, compared to Jiang Luoluo, they were immediately at a disadvantage. She was too graceful, too King valiant. Luo Dajiang heaved a long sigh, a hint of tenderness flashing across his eyes. Luo Dajiang was not a fool. How could he not know the girl's feelings? However, it was precisely because he knew that his current situation would only result in him dragging her down, harming her, and tarnishing her reputation. If he really married her, it would be an irreversible disaster for Jiang Luoluo. The name of the Demiurge Flawed 10 was still very threatening. No one dared to touch Jiang Luoluo now, mainly because the eldest senior brother, the leader of her sect, was fond of her. In terms of status alone, the eldest senior brother's position was naturally far from that of Lang Fantian, elderly Yisan, and guardian Wan Qinglu. But he was on par with Feng Guohai. Naturally, he was a person of high status and power. He would not lose his poise on the surface, nor would he allow anyone to touch Jiang Luoluo. Once they were married, however, what was done could not be undone. The senior brother's dream would be shattered, and he would definitely fly into a rage. Jiang Luoluo would no longer be able to stand in her sect under this rage. Her safety would be threatened, and her life would be at risk. It was not a joke. Are you leaving or not? Luo Dajiang hardened his heart, his expression turning cold. Jiang Luoluo burst into tears at once and said loudly, I know what you're worried about. I understand. As long as you marry me, I won't go back. I'll stay and not go anywhere. I'll only be your mistress in the inner residence. Luo Dajiang sucked in a deep breath, his face livid. You have a great future ahead of you. You're a true disciple of a middle-class celestial luck banner. What an opportunity that is. Why don't you cherish it? Yin Yang was not an ordinary person. Although he had only heard half of the conversation, he had already understood the whole story. They were obviously a pair of lovers, but because of the Demiurge Flawed 10's identity as a whetstone, they were now separated by life and death. Luo Dajiang, on the other hand, looked like he had resigned himself to his fate. It was obvious that he did not want to hold Jiang Luoluo back, which was why he had reprimanded her harshly. In spite of this, if there was no deep love in his heart, it would be easy for him to abandon her after he had seduced her. In spite of this, he had held on, not even giving her a title. He was afraid that he would harm the person in front of him in a moment of impulse. Chapter 983. Luo Dajiang's parents watched helplessly from the side. Their faces were full of deep regret, and they wanted to say something, but they did not. They had obviously seen this scene too many times. It was not that they did not know what to say, but they did not know how to speak. If they really spoke, who should they persuade and how could they persuade? They were stuck in a dilemma. Oh, it's Lady Jiang Luoluo. Yin Yang laughed. It's the residence of Nine Supreme's honor to have Lady Jiang here. Please come in, please come in. Lady Jiang's gracious presence brings light to our humble dwelling. When I first saw Lady Jiang, I've wanted to have a friend like Lady Jiang. Please come in, coming quickly. As he spoke, he gave Jiang Luoluo a look. Jiang Luoluo's expression changed as well as her eyes. She chuckled and said cheerfully, "Greetings, Supreme Cloud. I, Jiang Luoluo, am pleased to meet you. Supreme Cloud, you're my friend from now on. We hit it off right from the start, friends of life and death." Yin Yang laughed. That's right. We hit it off right from the start, friends of life and death. Lady Jiang, please come in quickly. Before Yin Yang's words echoed in the air, Jiang Luoluo walked into the residence of 9 Supremes with her head held high and chest puffed out, ignoring Luo Dajiang. Luo Dajiang was anxious. Supreme Cloud, you. Jiang Luoluo, you can't come in. Jiang Luoluo said with her head held high. What did you say? What right do you have to say that? Didn't you hear that it was my good friend, Supreme Cloud, who invited me in? What does it have to do with you? Who are you to me? What right do you have to interfere with my freedom? I'm not here with you. I'm here to visit my good friend. Supreme Lord Cloud is my good friend. Luo Dajiang was speechless. Brother Luo. Yin Yang's expression was still warm as he said slowly. Friends have come from afar. It's a must to be a good host. Let's talk about it later. Let's welcome you all tonight. He interrupted Luo Dajiang and welcomed Wu Menghuan and Luo Dajiang's family into the residence of 9 Supremes. Wu Menghuan, who had been watching from the side, suddenly wore a sincere smile. His expression relaxed as he laughed. Since it's a welcome, I wonder if there's wine? But is it enough? Of course there is, and it's good wine. There's definitely enough to drink. Great. Without another word, Wu Menghuan walked in with Yin Yang, ignoring Luo Dajiang who was standing at the door in a daze. Luo Dajiang stood there blankly for a while, a look of relief flashing quietly in his eyes. He sighed softly and followed them. Her eyes snuck a peek at the red silhouette beside Yin Yang, tenderness flashing in them. At this moment, he was surprised to see Jiang Luoluo suddenly turn around and glare at him. Then with a snort, she raised her head and walked forward arrogantly. Luo Dajiang's heart softened. How could he not see that the girl's eyes were brimming with tears just now? As she turned her head, the tears fell into the air. He could feel that the girl's mood had finally relaxed a little bit. Perhaps, the residence of 9 Supremes is the place that will truly change my fate. I hope it won't be a disaster because of my arrival. Luo Dajiang murmured in his heart. That night, in order to welcome Luo Dajiang and Wu Menghuan, Dong Qitian kindly gave them a night off and allowed the Demiurge Flawed 10 to reunite and drink. However, beautiful scenery never lasted long. After the feast, Luo Dajiang and Wu Menghuan began their journey to hell. That night, at the banquet table, a total of 12 people were completely drunk. Yin Yang, Qian Duoduo, and the Demiurge Flawed 10. Young Master of Dark Mist, Shirbugia, Traceless Whiteblade, Ren Qingquang, Triautumn Swordsman, Shi Wuchen, Yellow-clad Sword of Frost, Lan Ruojuan, Purple-robed Golden Needle, Wu Menghuan, Golden-armed Scholar, Tai Ching Song, Vicious Physician, Ping Xiaoyi, Starsoul Saberman, Luo Dajiang, Serene Soul of 9 Springs, Kong Luoyue, and Eternal Sky Assassin Guan Yuanyang. The Demiurge Flawed 10 had finally reunited after a long time. Each of them had their own experiences that they could not talk about, their untold sorrows and sufferings, and their grievances. But when they gathered together this time, there wasn't a single person that spoke of their encounters after they parted, and all of them chose some interesting matters of the Jianghu to talk about. The room was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere was extremely joyous. Towards the end, when the 10 of them were already tipsy, Wu Menghuan suddenly laughed and howled, saying hoarsely, "The sun and moon are no longer what they used to be. From now on, I'll never be a whetstone." The 9 of them were stunned when they heard him. Then they shouted in unison, "All right, we'll never be a whetstone again." Yin Yang, who was sitting at the head of the table, looked indifferent as he said slowly, "I don't think there's anything wrong with being a whetstone." Once Yin Yang spoke, the 10 men glared at him in unison, their eyes glaring at him furiously. The humiliation of being a whetstone had been weighing on them for far too long. Now, someone actually said in front of them, that there was nothing wrong with being a whetstone. To put it nicely, it was easy for him to say that, but to put it bluntly, it was a blatant mockery that was poking at their scars. However, the person who had spoken was Yun Yang. The Demiurge Flawed 10 were still very respectful towards Yun Yang, the leader of the residents of Nine Supremes. Although they were unhappy, they did not say anything in the end. In spite of this, the group's mood sank, no longer as excited as before. It was because these people had a good impression of Yun Yang. Those who were slightly darker would have suspected Yun Yang's motive of recruiting the Demiurge Flawed 10. Was he trying to make them into the residents of Nine Supreme's professional whetstones? While he was giving them a place to stay, he was also trying to trap them here and use them to the very end. Using them to the very end. Otherwise, why would he say such a thing? I wonder what the so-called whetstone is in this person's eyes and heart? Yun Yang said in a low voice. First of all, no one can deny that a whetstone has its value. If it doesn't have a certain value, even if you want to be a whetstone, no one will come to you. Don't you think this logic makes sense, everyone? Shirbujia raised his brows and said, Of course we understand this, but all these years, I don't care about your past experiences. It has nothing to do with the topic at hand. We'll talk about it when it's needed in the future. Yun Yang cut him off and said, I only want to ask all of you, during all these years of being a whetstone, did your cultivation base improve quickly? Was your advancement high? Of course we achieved something. If we didn't, wouldn't we have been bullied to death a long time ago? Luo Dajiang said. What are the battle results of all of you in these years? Were they all defeats? Yun Yang's expression was unchanging as he continued to ask without batting an eyelid. Chapter 984. It turns out that all of your achievements are exceptionally dazzling. Why do you think that you're whetstones then? Could it be that you've acknowledged yourselves as whetstones, just because your opponents have made you into whetstones? Yun Yang smiled. From what I see, instead of saying that the sect disciples are using you as whetstones to train themselves, it's more like a bunch of whetstones colliding with each other. That's all. Tai Ching Song said. A bunch of whetstones? Do you mean that not only are we whetstones, but our opponents are as well? Can't you think so? While those people are using you as whetstones, aren't they becoming your whetstones at the same time as well? That's why I said that all of you are each other's whetstones. Doesn't this make sense? Yun Yang asked. The 10 men were silent for a moment before they finally nodded in agreement. Yun Yang's words were not wrong. Since there are whetstones, what's a rock? What's a saber? Since all of you are each other's whetstones, it means that it's just a collision between rocks. Yun Yang said. Then where's the real saber? Are they the saber in the end? Or are you the saber? The 10 men fell into silence again, not speaking for a long time. No way. Are all of you starting to feel inferior again? It looks like all of you are too affected by the so-called whetstones. From what I see, at least at this stage, neither of you has the right to be called a saber. What all of you have shown so far is that you're just a rock that's harder. How can you say that you're sharp and invincible? Yun Yang said mercilessly. They've long set their stance and used you all as whetstones, so they're already in an unbeatable state of mind. They're stuck in their own ways and naturally lost. Yet all of you are blaming yourselves and really see yourselves as whetstones. How can you not be defeated with this mentality alone? Yun Yang's expression was amiable, his words meaningful and lingering. Lan Ruojuan pondered for a moment before asking respectfully, May I ask, boss, what should we do? Yun Yang said, First of all, of course, we have to treat our hearts correctly and find our place from the root. Then we have to fight. Only when we have the heart of a powerhouse and know why we have to fight is the right path of cultivation. Do you understand? What all of you need to do now is to correct your state of mind during this period of time and sort out your strengths and weaknesses, as well as the flaws of your techniques. There are many cultivation books in our sect that can be used as reference, so that your path of cultivation won't be rough anymore. This is the first. Secondly, I have to transform myself from a whetstone into an incomparably sharp blade in the upcoming hellish training. Only when you acknowledge the position of saber. Out, that out. Even if you can't transform yourself into a godly weapon in the end, even if you can only transform yourself into a hard saber embryo, there's still hope for you to shine. At least, you're no longer the so-called whetstone, right? Yun Yang paused for a moment before continuing. What I hope to see is, from today onwards, all the celestial destinies elites in the martial world are all whetstones in your eyes, helping you to sharpen your blades as you move forward. Yun Yang's tone was as indifferent as ever, and his gaze was as calm as ever. If you still see yourself as a whetstone, and join the residents of 9 Supremes only for a safe and secure place, then you'll be disappointed. It's the same here and there, because the residents of 9 Supremes will only lead a batch of divine weapons to create new worlds and forge new glory. It's not a safe nest for whetstones to shine with the light. He stood up softly. I'll go back and rest first. Think about it carefully. Choose for yourselves who's right and who's wrong. Yin Yang turned and floated away. A long time after Yin Yang had left, everyone was still in a state of silence. What Yin Yang had said earlier had pierced into the hearts of all 10 of them from another angle. Everyone felt their divine souls trembling. That's right. Why am I destined to be a whetstone? Why can't others be mine? After a long time, Shi Wuchen sneered and said, the Demiurge Flawed 10 have been the whetstones in the eyes of the world for far too long. Not only the world, but even those of us who were directly involved have acknowledged their status as whetstones. I, Shi Wuchen, am utterly ashamed. Lan Ruojuan said shamefully. Boss seems to be very disappointed in us. Ren Xingguang said. If it were me, I'd be disappointed as well. We've spent so much effort only to recruit a bunch of stones. Who would be willing to lead a bunch of stones? Even if it's to build a stone city, they'd think that the material is not good enough. Wu Minghuan took a deep breath and said, so if I look at the world from a different perspective, this is how the clouds and mist are parted to reveal the clear sky. Why can't I, Wu Minghuan, use the world's heroes as my whetstones? Luo Dajiang guffawed and said loudly, I've decided. I want all the cultivators in the world to be my whetstones. Who knows? I might have to ask the 9 of you to be my whetstones in this short period of time. A sharp glint flashed across Guan Wanyang's eyes. All the cultivators in the world except me are whetstones. That's right. All except me are whetstones. The 10 of them stood up and spoke in unison, their voices deafening. I'm going back to sleep. We'll continue the training tomorrow morning. Straighten your attitude. I'm going back too. I'll participate in the training tomorrow morning. Straighten my attitude. The 10 of them left in a single file. In spite of this, their mental state right now was like a different person compared to just now. The residence of 9 Supremes Hill had long been established. But other than Supreme Cloud, the rest of the 9 Supremes did not have a clear location. Therefore, everyone was temporarily staying in a big yard, including their families. The hill of the residence of 9 Supremes leader isn't a place anyone can enter. Without a position of Supreme, how can one have the face to enter a hill that will belong to someone else sooner or later? Luo Dajiang strode towards the yard where his family stayed. The other 9 people looked at him in surprise, not knowing what he was up to or what he was planning to do. Although his parents were in the family compound, there was still Jiang Luoluo. This guy used to avoid her like the plague, and avoided her every day. Luo Dajiang came to the yard's door with a majestic gait and suddenly shouted, Jiang Luoluo, listen to me. As soon as he said that, everyone, both inside and outside the courtyard, jumped in fright. Jiang Luoluo, who was sitting in a daze before the lamp, was thinking about her uncertain future, about Luo Dajiang's refusal to accept her, and about the grievances she had suffered all these years. Her eyes were already rimmed red, just as she was lamenting herself, thinking that she would have to play the role of a shrewish woman for a long time in the future, constantly expressing her feelings and fighting for her own happiness. She could not help sighing. It was at this moment that she suddenly heard Luo Dajiang shout, and she could not help but be shocked. Why did this fool, who felt that he had no future, and was ashamed of his inferiority in front of her despite loving her deeply, suddenly go mad? She got up quickly and looked through the window, only to see Luo Dajiang standing tall in front of the yard's door. He seemed to be filled with an unprecedented, majestic, and domineering aura. She could not help but be shocked. Luo Dajiang roared. Jiang Luoluo, listen to me. From now on, I won't run away anymore. I want to marry you. I want to make you my wife. However, Yin Yang was still the most incisive. As expected of the leader of a sect, to be able to dispel the demons in the hearts of 10 people in such a short period of time. It's like a blow to the head and a sermon to those who are lost. Looks like I have to work harder again. I need to put in more effort in the special training. The Demiurge Flawed 10 left in one go. Only one person was left at the table, which had been sitting neatly together. It was little fatty Qian Duoduo. The fats on Qian Duoduo's body jiggled, as if he was extremely agitated. He murmured, the Demiurge Flawed 10, who are known as the whetstones of the world's talents, now have the intention to use the whole world as their whetstone. What should I do? Am I really not as good as them? Am I not good enough? I want to join the special training too. As the major domo of the residence of 9 Supremes, this is a position that's second only to one and above all. How can I fall behind? I can't fall too far behind no matter what. I have to keep up with their footsteps. Even if I can't catch up to Boss Yin, I can't lose to those 10 idiots. Who's worse than who? I'll join the hellish training tomorrow morning as well. But I'll only be there for the morning. One needs to be persistent and act according to one's capabilities. I still have business to attend to in the afternoon. Earning resources is my main job now. Little Fatty told himself with determination in his eyes. The 10 of them use all the cultivators in the world as their whetstones. I'll use everyone who can earn money in the world as my whetstones. I want to earn more money than anyone else. Not only do I want to become an expert, but I also want the residents of 9 Supremes to replace the Tang family and become the wealthiest family in this world. Come on, Qian Duoduo. You can do it. You can do it. Little Fatty's expression was unprecedentedly determined, his eyes gleaming with the luster of a spiritual jade. As time went by, the number of people in the residence of 9 Supremes increased. During this period of time, Little Fatty had been in constant contact with various human traffickers. The number of young boys and girls under the age of 10 that he had bought alone was more than 3,000. Including the original ones, the residence of 9 Supremes was close to 10,000 in terms of headcount alone. What made Yin Yang especially gratified was that many of the newly bought children had decent aptitudes. This meant that the money spent was not in vain. He then gave Little Fatty another large sum of spiritual jade. Go buy more. Especially those who provide disciples and resources to the various sections. Keep them at all costs. Also, don't forget to build a connection with these human trafficker organizations. Don't let any of them slip through the net in the future. Don't worry about money, don't feel the pinch at all. Yin Yang instructed. Yin Yang's last sentence seemed to be superfluous, but of course, Little Fatty would not feel the pinch. The money spent, despite being huge, was only kept by these human trafficker organizations for a period of time. After a period of time, when they had found out the other party's background and started their operation, they would naturally take it all back. There was even the accumulation of these organizations over the years. In light of this, Little Fatty was full of vigor and did not slack off at all. In the days that followed, it was basically 2 of the Demiurge Flawed 10 who followed Little Fatty to train for half a day each day. The remaining half of the day and night were spent with Little Fatty to do business, acting as bodyguards and spies. In the residence of 9 Supremes, all the children who came to the residence were given basic cultivation methods and a certain amount of cultivation resources. What Yin Yang did not lack at the moment was a large amount of spiritual jade. A certain amount of lower-class spiritual jade was enough to build a foundation for the children who had yet to cultivate their foundation. There was no need to spend more. It was only when a disciple who stood out from the crowd appeared that they would be given further training. As for the children who came to the residence of 9 Supremes, especially those bought from human traffickers, each of them knew that the cultivation opportunity before them was not easy to come by. Once they missed it, it would not come again. Not only did they escape their original tragic fate, but they also had the chance to cultivate. All of them cultivated with all their might, afraid that they would be eliminated by the residents of Nine Supremes. Later on, they learned that they could return home with a sum of money, even if they were eliminated or choose to be a servant in the residence of Nine Supremes. However, since they had the chance to become a legitimate sect disciple, why would they want to be a servant? Chapter 986. Yun-yang was happy to see this happen. Without batting an eyelid, he set up a spiritual gathering formation with the ethereal amethysts at the children's living quarters. With such a large formation set within a small formation, the effectiveness increased by several times. The whistling spiritual energy gathered was cleansing the children's meridians and marrow every day, shedding their mortal bodies and changing their bones. On the other hand, those who were recruited by Little Fatty in the beginning were sent away in batches, because their talents were so poor that they could hardly cultivate. In spite of this, each of them had 100 gold taels for their journey home. To an ordinary person, this was already a considerable amount of wealth. As long as they did not act recklessly and squander without reason, they would be able to live a carefree life. In this way, the weeds were constantly eliminated, and the gold was kept. Round after round of great waves washing the sand, all of it was carried out silently. Yun-yang and the Demiurge Flawed 10 were probably engrossed in Dong Qitian's training, so the raiders of All But God had temporarily stopped their activities. After all, time was running out. The Battle of the Celestial Banner was imminent. Although the residence of Nine Supremes was a newly established sect that had only been established for a few days, the entire sect was brimming with vigor. Everyone was seizing every second to cultivate and improve. The higher-ups were preparing to fight for the position of the Nine Supremes, while the disciples were gearing up to fight for the position of an inner disciple. Everyone was working hard, doing everything they could. Little Fatty continued to bring back a batch of children every 2 days. Sometimes, he could even bring back 3 batches in a day. Yin-yang was impressed by his efficiency. To think that there would be so many human mediums in the Xianhuang world. This was truly unexpected and shocking. Fortunately, the residence of Nine Supremes was spacious enough that it could accommodate everyone, no matter how many people came. In spite of this, the children who came in batch after batch would never stay together. This was something Yin-yang had planned long ago. According to the time they came in, he had divided them into the first and second batches. It was now the 19th batch. Although Qian Duodua was still bringing people back continuously, the interval between each batch had become longer. Obviously, the stock of human mediums nearby had been almost emptied by Little Fatty. Keep sweeping. Yun-yang was acutely aware that this was the delicate moment when he was about to come into contact with these human mediums higher-ups, or their base camp. These human mediums must have more high-level goods in their hands. As long as they continued to interact, they would be able to dig out the root. On this day, Dong Qitian went to Yun-yang and asked for a batch of heaven and earth resources. Are there any heavenly treasures left after exchanging with the spirit's grave? Give it to me if you have it. Dong Qitian was as blunt as ever, simple and crude. Yes. Yun-yang's answer was straightforward as well. Of course Yun-yang had won. The so-called exchange was just a smokescreen to fool the others. All the heavenly treasures he had obtained during this period of time were still in his hands. Whether it was from trading with the General Commerce League, or from robbing the raiders of All But God, most of them were still around. Although Emmy was greedy for treasures of heaven and earth, its standards were getting higher and higher, and ordinary items were no longer worthy of its attention. What do you want? I'm going to refine some pills. All right. Very straightforward. I'm not refining the pills for my own use. I'm refining them for those 10 fellows. These 10 fellows' meridians aren't flexible enough. So I have to refine some pills to increase their flexibility before they can consume pills that can elevate their cultivation base. If I forcefully elevate their cultivation base now, they'll be overwhelmed and explode. I have no objections even if I'm giving them to you for your own use. Feel free to use them. It's fine even if you refine them all into pills. You wish, child. I've agreed to train your subordinates, not to be your professional alchemist. Dong Qitian sighed and said, time is of the essence now. I have no choice but to do this. If I can't speed up those few children's improvement, you won't stand a chance in the battle of the Celestial Luck Banner, half a year later. Yin Yang's eyes shone. If that's the case, I'll have to trouble you to only refine pills to elevate your cultivation base. I'll think of a way to improve the meridian's flexibility that you're worried about. I guarantee that all the dangers will be resolved without a hitch. Dong Qitian's eyes widened. Huh. The word huh was a clear indication of his distrust. Yunyang snorted twice and rolled his eyes. Then, he swaggered off without giving any explanation. How dare you not trust me? Why don't you think about the many old wounds and damaged meridians in your body? Who was the one who healed you? I can even easily heal the injuries that you've sustained for hundreds and thousands of years. What more the little burden you have now? What's there to talk about? Yin Yang was a man of action. That night, he used the chi of vitality to soften the meridians of the 11 men. Other than the demiurge flawed 10, there was also a little fatty among the 11 men. When Dong Qitian saw the 11 men again the next morning, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. How did you do it? Dong Qitian pressed. It was obvious that the scene had exceeded Saint Lord equals knowledge. The 11 men spoke in unison. Boss has the medicinal pills, the best of the best. F***ck. Dong Qitian expressed his dissatisfaction with Yin Yang's method. It's good enough to give them to the 10 of you. It's a waste to give them to this little fatty. Why give them to him? To make him fat. Why give them to him? Do you have so many medicinal pills that you don't have anywhere to put them? Qian Duo was exasperated by a certain someone's attitude. His mouth was agape, and he was so angry that he could not speak. I'm so disliked. Just you wait, old man. When my cultivation base surpasses yours, I'll beat you up 8 times a day. Each of the men had a piece of ethereal amethyst in their hands. Outside, there were 108 pieces of ethereal amethysts to reinforce the mountain guarding formation. In addition, Yun Yang had spilled the ethereal amethysts inside the sect to build a second layer of spiritual gathering formation. The efficiency of their cultivation was unprecedented. After all, such a spiritual chi density was at least 20 times higher than other places with dense spiritual chi. In addition to the ethereal amethysts that each of them possessed, and the fact that each of them were gifted geniuses. In addition to that, an old monster like Dong Qitian trained them with the ultimate heaven mystic method, the chi of vitality that strengthened their meridian's flexibility, and Dong Qitian's medicinal pills that enhanced their cultivation base. In summary, the 12 men's cultivation base had skyrocketed, as if they had a cheat code. It was truly a new height and a new atmosphere every day. Yun Yang's cultivation base had broken through Saint Level 2 and reached beginner Saint Level 3 within these 10 days. It was a leap of 2 whole realms. The Demiurge Flawed 10's advancement was not any weaker than Yun Yang's. Without exception, all of them had advanced to Saint Level 3. With the cultivation base quality of the sect's upper echelon, it could be said that they had already surpassed ordinary lower-class Celestial Luck Banner sections. However, this was only limited to the quality of the sect's upper echelon cultivators. When it came to the cultivation base, ability, and combat experience of the sect's disciples, they were at least worlds apart. Dong Qitian could see this clearly, but he could not do anything about it. They're all trash. How can we drag them out to fight head-on? Do they have a death wish? Do they have a death wish? Chapter 987. Early in the morning, the higher-ups of the residence of 9 Supremes, who had temporarily rested for a day, dragged Dong Qitian to the disciples' cultivation area. Before they entered, they could already hear the childish cries from within. These were the first batch of disciples who had entered the residence of 9 Supremes, the first batch of disciples who had started cultivating. Once Dong Qitian entered, his eyes widened again, almost popping out of their sockets. What am I seeing? Are these disciples still the trash I saw when I first arrived? Why are their bones and meridians so exquisite? What's going on? Although the innate aperture acupoints of these disciples didn't change much, the barrier of the aperture acupoints had become a lot thinner, and it wasn't just one or two, but many of the aperture acupoints had become thinner. Once the time was right, the innate aperture acupoints would definitely be greatly improved. Every disciple seemed to be full of spirit and energy, like little wolf cubs full of fighting spirit, and revealed a ruthlessness from their bones. Whether it was the boys or the girls, all of them were cultivating diligently, as if their lives depended on it. Although these disciples only practiced the most basic cultivation methods, and their moves were also the most common basic combat skills, but when they fought with each other, they were impressively orderly. This included the two little girls, who were around 7 or 8 years old, who were fighting each other seriously with puffed cheeks. The fight was lively, advancing and retreating, neither giving way to the other. Dong Qitian rubbed his eyes. He wanted to wake himself up from the dream, but when he opened his eyes again, there were clearly no changes. Did this mean that this was reality? Was it real? Was it not fake? At the edge of the cultivation area, there were still many 17 or 18 years old youths, 20-something-year-old youths, and a small number of middle-aged men who were quietly carrying out the necessary security work. For example, they boiled water, applied medicine, soothed the children's muscles and bones, massaged their limbs, and some were cooking in full swing. These service personnel were probably the ones who had been eliminated. These people really did not have the talent to cultivate, but they were unwilling to leave the residence of 9 Supremes, so they automatically served the future disciples of the sect. It was obvious that everyone here cherished their days in the residence of 9 Supremes. No one wanted to leave. Young Yun, how did you do it? Dong Qitian had only asked, but he had already understood everything. Who was Dong Qitian? What kind of person was he? What kind of insight and knowledge did he have? He instantly sensed the difference in the spiritual qi here. The unusually rich spiritual qi of heaven and earth here was incomparable to the spiritual qi of heaven and earth where Yun Yang and the others were cultivating. But it was more delicate and gentle. It could be said to be the most suitable environment for those who had just started their cultivation journey. In addition, the spiritual qi concentration was not as good as Yun Yang and the others' cultivation ground. If the concentration of spiritual qi here were to be compared, it would be enough to defeat all the sects and families that did not have the celestial luck banner. What was more, Dong Qitian could even sense a spiritual qi whirlwind flowing in the field, moving back and forth gently. Cultivating in such an atmosphere reminded Dong Qitian of the spiritual cultivation land his master had painstakingly found for him. The spiritual wind valley of rebirth. Cultivating in the spiritual wind valley of rebirth required one to constantly be immersed in the spiritual wind that passed through the valley. Not only could the force of the spiritual wind wash the cultivator's meridians and cleanse the cultivator's bones, but it could also train the cultivator's skin, flesh, and bones. The spiritual wind valley was only effective for children below the age of 15. As for the atmosphere before him, the spiritual wind that was whistling back and forth was more than 10 times more active and frequent than the spiritual wind valley of rebirth. These children seemed to be undergoing marrow cleansing at every moment, being reborn and reborn. Every second. No, it was not just that. If he considered that these children were still fighting with their lives and training themselves with all their might, the effect would be even better with the help of the spiritual wind's cleansing. It was definitely not wishful thinking. Dong Qitian's thoughts raced. He had already made up his mind earlier. The so-called observation was merely a glimpse. What he had learned was shocking, but he did not delve into it. Now that he had taken a closer look, he was shocked to realize that a small portion of these children, who were cultivating now, had already reached the ultimate heaven sect standards for recruiting disciples. It was an unbelievable miracle. What was the ultimate heaven sect like back then? What was the residence of 9 Supremes now? How could there be such a bizarre situation? With extreme shock, Dong Qitian checked 19 similar locations in a row. The more he looked, the more shocked he became. It was truly a thrilling and shocking sight. All the locations were the same. There were at least dozens of such talented youths hiding in each location. Dong Qitian heaved a deep sigh after his inspection. He studied Yun Yang from head to toe like he was looking at a demon, not saying a word for a long time. Sure, Wuchen and the rest still had their cultivation base limited, and so did their eyesight. Naturally, they could not see the subtleties, but Dong Qitian could see it clearly and understood the deeper meaning behind it. If the residents of Nine Supremes continued to develop at this scale, and at this speed, its rise was inevitable and unstoppable. As long as Yin Yang was not stupid enough to recklessly provoke a force that could not be defeated and completely crushed, the future of the residents of Nine Supremes would be smooth and unimpeded. Once it began to rise, it would be unstoppable, advancing at a tremendous pace. Dong Qitian asked himself honestly, perhaps even the ultimate heaven sect back in the day did not possess such a heaven-defying foundation and ability. We can recruit the first batch of core disciples now. Dong Qitian exhaled deeply, suppressing the shock in him as he gave a suggestion about the sect's disciples for the first time. We can do it now. Yin Yang was genuinely surprised. Indeed, Dong Qitian was speechless. Why does this child still look like he's not satisfied? What else do you want? Do you want to ascend to heaven? If you don't start recruiting core disciples, step up the training, and teach them upper-level cultivation methods and techniques, all of you won't be able to make it to the Celestial Luck Banner competition half a year later. Actually, even if you start now, there might not be many who can be of use in the next half a year. Those who can fight are next to none, at most. Where there's a will, there's a will. As long as there's a chance. Yin Yang was as confident as ever. Dong Qitian was no longer completely disdainful. Instead, he felt like he was witnessing history, from nothing to something. The feeling excited him, and his condition was unprecedentedly good. I originally wanted to transform all these children into ethereal bodies and groom them, so that their cultivation would be twice the result with half the effort. Yin Yang was a little regretful. But now it's barely passable. Dong Qitian staggered and almost fell to the ground. The corners of his lips twitched as he said, "Why don't you die first? You can ascend to heaven directly, and fall head first. That's the most satisfying thing. Today is another birthday, a solar birthday. Thank you all for your blessings. Today I didn't drink." During the meal, my wife said, "Since so many brothers are here, why don't you have a drink?" I rejected her sternly and righteously. "I'm a man, I'll quit drinking when I say so. I can't drink no matter what." Everyone looked at me with admiration. My birthday was even better. Chapter 988. As for the white-robed, black-robed, and blue-robed disciples that little Fatty had set up earlier, Yun Yang had abolished all of them with a frown, ignoring them entirely. Little Fatty's plan was based on the old rules of various sects, imitating others, and making a fool out of themselves. If Yun Yang were to imitate everything, he would be suspected of being a traitor. It was better to deal with the current situation directly, and think about the follow-up later. Everything in the residence of Nine Supremes was new, so there was no need to deliberately imitate the old bound of universe. Now, the residents of Nine Supremes will only recruit disciples. All of them will be dressed in white, and disciples who can fight will be selected to prepare for the Celestial Luck Banner contest. The ranks will be divided according to age for now, and after the contest, they will be ranked according to their combat strength and achievements. The one with the strongest cultivation base and outstanding battle achievements will be the current eldest senior brother of the residents of Nine Supremes. Such a customization was simple and crude. As for the future, after they become the Nine Supremes' inner disciples, their respective teachers will naturally decide on their assignments. The related clothing and miscellaneous items will also be dealt with in the future. The most urgent thing now is to work hard to improve your cultivation base and combat strength to face the Celestial Luck Banner contest. Everything else will give way. With this notice, all the children in the Valley of the Residents of Nine Supremes were stirred. Obviously, in the children's eyes, this notice was the real opportunity for all disciples to make a great leap. Sect Leader Master is finally accepting us into the sect. The Celestial Luck Banner contest this time is the opportunity for us to officially enter the sect. Under the command of the stewards, The children walked out neatly in rows, each of them puffing out their chests and standing straight. Their little faces were washed clean and brimming with youthfulness. Everyone was waiting to be selected, hoping that they could be selected. Dong Qitian's deific consciousness swept through the entire residence of 9 Supremes, like it had descended from the sky, encompassing all the children. At this moment, his divine aura was like a prison, dominating the world. The more than 3,000 children present all felt a chill in their hearts, and a nervous and perturbed look appeared on their faces at the same time. It had begun. Can I be selected? Dong Qitian's deific consciousness surged like never before, displaying all the children's conditions in front of him. Looking at the nervous little faces, Dong Qitian actually felt an urge to laugh. Actually, regardless of whether it was the mobilization or coming out to line up, it was all just a formality, a formality. Even if all of these children stayed in the room to sleep, he would be able to accurately select them, eliminating the weak, and keeping the strong, keeping the elites. Such a big fanfare was only for the sake of the future of the sect, deliberately creating such a grand ceremonial and solemn feeling. It really was like stealing a bell while deceiving one's ears. Dong Qitian looked at them row by row, looking at their spirits first. He felt that each of these little fellows had good spirits. Basically, each of them had a soaring vigor and a kind of ruthlessness. This kind of ruthlessness not only surprised him, but also somewhat moved him. This group of children is not bad. Just this spirit alone has already met my basic requirements. They are outstanding, Dong Qitian murmured, and proceeded to pick those with better aptitude and physique, as well as those who could break through the limit of their chakras in the near future. At a glance, he found no less than 100 choices that met his requirements. There are so many. How can this be? Dong Qitian was shocked by his own discovery. Looking closely again, not only did he confirm that it was true, but he also felt a sense of reluctance. He could not bear to give up on this and that. He had picked them according to the ultimate heaven sect's standards for selecting disciples, and yet he could not even eliminate a few? What was going on? The children from the first 6 batches, especially, almost all of them were qualified. Each of them was pure gold and unpolished jade. They were worthy. I have to, no matter how reluctant I am, I can only choose the best of the best. Dong Qitian suppressed his thoughts and increased the selection limit according to Yin Yang's request, choosing 99 out of the best. This was the number that Yin Yang had stated earlier. However, it was precisely this head count of less than 100 that made Dong Qitian, a man who had always been decisive, suffer from a dilemma of choice. After some twists and turns, 99 people were finally selected. With a flash of red light, 99 children were selected from their respective groups and floated in the air, quietly drifting out and landing on the large square outside. The selection is complete. As soon as the 4 words were spoken, the remaining 2,000 children bit their lips tightly, tears glistening in their eyes. Their eyes were already red. In spite of this, they still stood strong, staring at the higher-ups of the sect who stood high above, their eyes filled with silent pleading. Are we going to be eliminated just like this? We can't accept this. We can't accept this. Today's residence of 9 Supreme's first selection ends here. Yin Yang's voice came slowly. The second selection will be held a month later. Only 99 people will be selected in each selection. Children, I've seen and remembered your efforts. The selection standard this time isn't to say that you're not as good as the chosen, but the quota is limited. I hope that you'll work harder and strive to enter the residence of 9 Supremes in the next selection. The children relaxed a little when he said this. However, they were still far from being completely relaxed. These children who came from the lowest rung of society were determined, smart, hardworking, and sensitive at the same time. They knew very well that the sect leader's words were meant to comfort them. The 99 people selected this time must be the best of the best, the best of the best. They must be better than them, or perhaps even better than them. Although they were not sure in which aspect, they must be better than them in some way. What they had to do next was to cultivate harder, be more serious in doing things, and be more attentive in comprehending. Next time, I must be selected. On the other side, facing the 99 children who had been selected through layers of selection, Sherwuchen's voice was unusually solemn. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.